Marvel. Immortal. Can I obtain the ability of the others when they hit me? Chapter 61. What's the use of this tattered thing, the old pager that has been eliminated? Director Hill naturally didn't quite understand. Nick Fury has always been mature and stable, and there are countless secrets in his heart. It must be very important to keep him so obsessed before death. Fortunately, the members of the scientific group gave an affirmative answer. This pager looks very old at first glance, but the technology in it doesn't look like that of our planet. Even more surprising is, a little girl in a red dress came over. If I'm not mistaken, this is sending a signal to the universe, and the signal fluctuates so strongly that it can at least fly out of a small half of the universe. A word fell. The people around were suddenly shocked. Where is the little girl talking? Is this a place where you can talk? Valeria Richards just folded her arms in this way, believing it or not, and turned around and left without giving her a good face. Compared with other people, Director Hill believed that the file information that can only be accessed by 9th-level agents, the children of Mr. Fantastic Reed, were not normal human. Ji Duo Xing. That is the existence that will surpass Reed's IQ in the future. Soon, the genius members of the scientific team successfully cracked it and gave the answer. This is indeed a device that sends a signal to the universe. For a while, everyone was extremely shocked. Guess it. This is the blind cat ran into a dead mouse. Valeria Richards, who hadn't gone far, sneered, working with such a bunch of stupid guys, and didn't know when he could get revenge. At this time, a wonderful note came to mind. That being the case, you can build a device that sends a signal to the universe, not specifically to send it to a certain person, but to broadcast the coordinate position of the entire Earth to half of the universe. At that time, there will always be interstellar empires and cosmic gods coming. Ji Duoxing clenched his fists in depression. After the death of her parents, she would rather be buried with this planet. Just do it. Ji Duoxing immediately began to prepare the materials. In this moment, the N-51 base where they were located was over the east coast, and the figures wearing black steel suits broke through the air. Director Hill was ashamed after learning the news. That's not an ally. Obviously, the Stark Industrial Building has already been completely occupied by those mutants, but now it is starting to cruise the world. Iron Man is really dead. The American Team Steve, who was unblocked from the ice, appeared in this base. He did not appear in the crusade against Su Chen that day, but now he has become the backbone of many superheroes. He couldn't believe that his friend's son was killed in this way. Little Pepper paused. He knows the relationship between the two. Missing unknown. Director Hill shook his head. Where is Jarvis the smart butler? No, never showed up again. At this time, the American Team Steve suddenly felt an intuition that the cynical Iron Man Tony must still be alive. Are you sure you sent someone to excavate his body from the dirt in the pit? Yes, we did not rescue in time. Director Hill didn't know why the US team asked repeatedly. Hearing that, the US team Steve gritted his teeth, but didn't say much. At this time, even Director Hill's exquisite face also had a hint of thought. She suddenly thought of the Hydra that has made a comeback. One of the backbone scientists, Anam Zola, gave her a hint of inspiration. Isn't this guy? She suddenly understood what the US team was thinking about. Continents. In the central area, in a small rural town on the edge. The X-Men and its mutant students still live their lives here. Both Iceman and Quicksilver no longer mention the disappearance of Wolverine and others. Because of the horrible falsification of reality, many people have completely traced all traces of existence in the minds of many people. The information between each other is no longer equal, and it can only cause unnecessary disputes. Now how do we go on? A very real problem lingers in everyone's mind like this. In just one night, many more students from Xavier College of Genius had left secretly. A sad fact is that they went to defect to the number 1 mutant. After a series of blows, and after losing Professor Charles and being hunted down, young people who had a complete epiphany had already realized that Professor Charles in the past might have gone the wrong way. They chose to go to the future leader. Can't stay here anymore. As surrender, those students will inevitably expose their position. But the world is so big that they can only continue to be a mouse running around, avoiding the forces from the number 1 mutant, but also avoiding hunting by some military. Surrender. Maybe the number 1 mutant will treat them leniently. Fine shield. But the current shield bureau seems to exist in name only. There is no way to go to the Earth, and this is their state at this time. Despair. At this moment, outside a forest road outside the village, a man in a striped medical gown came over from a distance. He was slow, just stepping on the branches of the forest road so unhurriedly. The clicking sound kept creaking, just like a playful little boy, stomping the branches back and forth. Where did the kid come from? Everyone was surprised. But at this time, an elderly mutant suddenly widened his eyes and cried out, "Wait, why did he come out of the mental hospital? Who is this? A madman? Is it necessary to be so shocked?" "It's because the madman is too scared. That's Professor X's son. Professor X has the most valuable brain in the world. But his son is a schizophrenic. If this is not enough to make him afraid, he is afraid that every split personality of this guy has the ability of a mutant. According to Professor X's guess, his hopeless son may have given birth to thousands, even tens of thousands of split personalities." In an instant, everyone's complexion suddenly became extremely horrified. When will the professor have a son? But at this time, a stern cold wind blew in suddenly, and the figure on the forest road in the distance appeared in front of them in the blink of an eye. The man with his childish expression just now looked like a different person, suddenly showing a cruel smile. "Tell me, where did that bad old man go?" When the words fell, the boundless Mori Lang killing intent filled the surroundings. For a time, all the X-Men were unable to move. "Died. Your father is dead." "Nonsense." The man in the hospital gown in front of him sneered. "I clearly felt his disgusting breath. You told me that I was dead. I think you want to die." In an instant, the mutant who had just spoken was torn apart, blood gushing out. "Mountain. No one wants to tell the truth." David Charles Halley in front of him said with a sneer. "Nicknamed, the Big Group. Or it's called the Legion, or the Army. Professor Charles's son may have inherited the extremely rare psychic powers of his father. He is an Omega mutant. But at the same time, he is also a super severe schizophrenia patient, with at least thousands of split personalities, and each of them has a certain ability. Strictly speaking, he has hundreds of Omega-level abilities. Astral projection, distortion of reality, pain transfer, super speed, ultrasound, and even mind control, etc. Even David himself didn't know how much he was capable. He has always been very well behaved, and he can even be said to be a bit tame in a mental hospital. But after feeling something unusual, he decided to step out and take a look at the world. "Well, now you are not honestly telling me where that bad old man has gone." David sneered. At this moment, it is obvious that the person who dominates the personality is a cruel dark side killer. The extremely horrifying cold killing intent filled the surroundings, and the airflow around them couldn't help but become very slow. Every X-Men in front of him did not dare to take a big breath, for fear that it would cause the David in front of him to be unhappy. Just now, in addition to a man who was torn apart, another X-Men was directly stuffed into a tree out of thin air. The entire face, hands and feet were exposed on the surface of the tree, allowing everyone to felt terrified and frightened. Many of the X-Men who have experienced many battles even fought so hard that they did not dare to move. Even the Iceman dared not resist. Just when the killing intent was permeating and gradually turned into an abyss, it was about to swallow them. Why are my brothers so scared?" At this time, David in front of him showed a look of childishness, and he spoke very childishly in his words. Personality change. All the people present heaved a sigh of relief. Thank goodness. At this moment, the Iceman who reacted immediately swallowed his saliva and said boldly, "You are not looking for your father. He is playing peekaboo with Su Chen, the #1 mutant. If you want to see him, go find him." "Really?" David jumped up with excitement. "Really, you can find the #1 mutant just by searching the news. Go to the first city now, he must be there." The Iceman gritted his teeth and said with pain in his eyes. "Let you, the #1 mutant, see what a true infinite ability is called, a terrifying monster with hundreds of Omega abilities in one." "Thank you, brother, I will leave now." David looks extremely cheating. Obviously he looked like an adult, but when he left for a run, it was another child jumping around. Everyone felt extremely absurd, but they didn't dare to laugh at all, or even a slight smile. Thank God for being able to send this god of plague away, and to move eastward completely. Everyone looked at the Iceman in admiration. Correct. But at this moment, David, who was already drifting away between the forest roads, turned his head back again. He counted his fingers childishly and said, "Geller said at least half of his life will be taken when he leaves, otherwise he won't let it out." What? The X-Men in the village only felt their scalp tingling. Geller. Needless to think about it, it is naturally one of the countless personalities in David's mind, and it is most likely the dark side personality who has just controlled his body. Everyone was stupid, and couldn't believe that there was such an outrageous request. Next second, when they were completely swallowed up by appalling fear and despair, a group of X-Men fled around, completely reluctant to produce a trace of resistance. Great, brothers are going to play peekaboo with me. David clapped his hands excitedly and began to chase after him, completing his half-life hunting action. At this time, in the Baxter mansion in the downtown area of Manhattan, Su Chen and his sister Susan are reading Mr. Reed's research materials on parallel worlds. He stated that the world he lives in is main universe 616 feet. In order to prove that his multiverse really exists, Mr. Reed even observed the existence of a single universe and named it the Ultimate Universe. A timeline has been going on for at least 10 years, a world where superhero organizations are extremely prosperous. In order to avoid causing trouble, Mr. Fantastic Reed stopped observing. When Su Chen sighed, like a sponge, he started to absorb the knowledge crazily. Mr. Fantastic Reed deserves to be called the #1 existence in the world. In addition to these information, he even learned that a stable space channel device had been transferred out by the enemy in time. And this time, despair, a young and beautiful tall lady came in. "Dear King, we are in some trouble." Her name is Emma Grace Frost. A powerful mutant with telepathy and diamond form is also the backbone of the mutant who played an outstanding role in this annexation operation. Fanned by the butterfly effect. Naturally, everyone is not sure that she will inherit the post of Dean of Xavier College of Genius in the future, and Ms. Emma, who has entrusted Professor X's last wish, has already been put under the command of the #1 mutant. The Magneto does not want to be surrendered. The Mutant Brotherhood is still resisting our annexation. According to the plan, everyone is naturally to unite all mutants, take the lead in completing the annexation of mutant forces, and condense the mutant forces of the entire Earth into one. But now, Magneto, the boss of the Mutant Brotherhood, sneered and refused this request. He has a very tough attitude. Emma's delicate and flawless face showed a hint of displeasure. She didn't understand why the inadequate Magneto was still rebelling against the rule of the #1 mutant. "I understand." Su Chen completely closed a book of materials. For more than a day, Magneto has been hiding in his stronghold with an attitude of not seeing the king. But even so, some members of the Brotherhood of Mutants began to flee, trying to head to the capital city. This made the aging Magneto feel extremely embarrassed. A teenager who hasn't finished junior high school wants to ride on his head. Others are shameless, and he wants to be old-fashioned. Anyhow, after so many years of hiring the world, Magneto will naturally not endure such a shame. On an island in the Atlantic Ocean. This is the force where the Mutant Brotherhood is stationed. At least 2 decades ago, the Brotherhood led by Magneto was still full of enthusiasm, interested in overturning the existing order of the world, breaking the shackles on the mutants, and crushing all discrimination and injustice. It's a pity that all the conspiracy that was launched is always blocked by his friend Professor Charles. The two former good brothers have turned against each other for so many years. Each became a stumbling block to each other. Why does this happen? This is determined by their natural birth status. Magneto spent most of his childhood in suffering concentration camps, and even killed his mother in order to force him to awaken his abilities. However, Professor Charles was born well, graduated from a prestigious school, and has inherited hundreds of millions of fortunes and the current manor building when he was young. How big is the difference in status between these two people? This is also destined to have a different way of getting along with each other when they grow up. A feels the pain in the world, and his wife is separated when he grows up. He has been completely disappointed in society. Injustice and discrimination have bullied him for most of his life. A wealthy person is unwilling to break the existing order at all, and is willing to always act as a bridge between mutants and humans. This is the contradiction between the two all the time. Innate, unable to reconcile. But now, the already old Magneto saw a mutant star rising up, and successfully rose to the top with an out-of-control situation. He did it. He did everything he dreamed of. But he hates it too. Why is that person not himself? At this time, the Magneto, wearing a black robe and an iron helmet, looked at the formation coming from the island in front of him. I saw that under the ripples of space, Su Chen led Emma in this way, and his many mutants shuttled through the space in this way. It's him. Oh my god, that's the mutant number 1. He actually came in person. Under the gaze of everyone, a crowd of mutants swarmed from all over the island. Everyone is very curious about Su Chen, the number 1 mutant who looks at everything in the world and beats a lot of superheroes. After all, that is the savior of the entire race of mutants. So you came to commit suicide with me? Magneto said coldly. He just looked at the young man in a black sweater in front of him. He was slender and thin, with a handsome face. His indifferent and ruthless expression revealed an unkindness. Not in front of close people, Su Chen still looks like this, indifferent and arrogant, and there is no mood swing in his eyes, which makes people feel extremely chilling. This is a ruthless person. After the first meeting, Magneto King Eric seemed to see the shadow of his own past. Recalling the experience of the other party's total blackening, he suddenly smiled. His smile became a little gloomy. God is really unfair to me. Why can you completely awaken and run away in the laboratory, but in my childhood in the concentration camp, I didn't have enough power to tear all the shackles. Hatred. He hates it. If in the dark time of childhood, he had enough power to successfully awaken and excavate greater power, not the weak magnetic field controlling power at the time, then I am afraid he can also rewrite history. If I had enough power in my childhood, then I would definitely save my mother. Magneto gritted his teeth and looked very bitter. He thought of those hateful guys who killed his mother in public in order to force his awakening abilities to stimulate his abilities. Beast. At that moment, he had already darkened and fell into the abyss, and at that moment he vowed to completely subvert everything in the world. But his strength was still too low at that time. As a result, he was constantly used by them like a bereaved dog. Hatred. I really hate it. Therefore, seeing Su Chen who was able to walk out of the laboratory at such a young age and completely smash all injustices, Magneto suddenly became unbalanced in his heart. Old man, I'm not here to listen to your chatter. Su Chen said coldly. Either surrender or die. He directly issued an ultimatum. Su Chen doesn't care how much grudges the other party bears, and he doesn't care about the other party's past history. He is no longer the 13-year-old boy who was desperate in the past. His state of mind is completely falling into the abyss. After he has stepped into blackness, he will no longer show empathy, compassion, and sympathy for an outsider. Ha ha ha. Looking at the opponent's extremely indifferent face, Magneto continued to laugh for some reason. He is so satisfied. It is this ruthlessness, this scorn of all things, and only my domineering aura that can lead the mutants to go on. Rather than being like him, gradually acknowledging his old age, just shrinking on an island waiting for the judgment of fate. But he won't give in. Surrender. He can't do it. Very good. Magneto converged his smile. At this moment, a surging magnetic field surged in his body, and a vast momentum continued to rise from his body. He hasn't had a hearty battle for a long time. At the last moment of his life, he just wanted to be a real man, with the pride that Magneto should have, to face the number 1 mutant in front of him. Come and fight with me. Either you die or I live. If you die, it proves that you have no strength to continue to lead the mutants. Then death is not a shame. Certainly, if I die, all the members of the Mutant Brotherhood will completely surrender to you, and you will be their lord. Magneto's momentum is getting higher and higher. Just now, he was chattering like an old man in his twilight years, hating his own years. But now, the old meaning of his face has disappeared more and more, and the whole person reveals a strong meaning. At this time, the Magneto is back to the most powerful period in the past. If I die, promise me, young man, you must promise me, don't shrink back, don't be merciful, you must completely conquer the world, or even destroy it completely. As long as this is the case, they won't make a comeback. There is no retreat in your path. The horror hidden in the earth is beyond your imagination. Humph. This is from an old man's teaching to young people. Stop talking. Magneto's whole body fluctuated more and more vigorously, and the wanton surging magnetic fluctuations seemed to distort the surrounding light, forming a terrifying power. He shouted angrily, and the terrifying magnetic fluctuation turned into a shocking position and suddenly blasted towards the figure in front of him. The people who arrived were slightly surprised. But the figure standing in front of them is Su Chen. Faced with such a vast momentum, Su Chen didn't frown. He waved his hand directly, and a majestic wave of thought power shattered the position in front of him. Ho! Magneto roared, and the surrounding magnetic field fluctuations became more and more rippling. I saw iron water pipes buried under the ground directly out of the silt, and instantly plasticized into sharp thorns like a serpent. Towards the figure of Su Chen. It seems that you are really old, Su Chen said coldly. He didn't see any movement, and the iron thorns roaring around seemed to be plunged into the mud, and it became more and more difficult to move in the air. Another thought fluctuation. These plasticized steel pipes broke instantly, completely collapsed under the weird fluctuations of reality, and turned into a handful of gray particles and dissipated in the air. Wow! The faces of the members of the Brotherhood who were looking around changed drastically. Sure enough, it's a well-deserved reputation. Is this the strength of the #1 mutant? This is the first time everyone has seen Su Chen's combat style up close. Facing the veteran mutant leader Magneto, the performance of this #1 mutant was so plain that he didn't even take a step in the same place, so lightly dispelled all Magneto's offensive. Magneto had already felt at most a 30% chance of winning when the battle started. But now, the performance of the other party made his complexion even more embarrassing. Not to mention 30%, one Chengdu may be more for yourself. Smelly boy. Magneto became a little angry. He directly manipulated the opponent's body with a roar. You must know that there is iron in the human body. Although it is very small and very rare, Magneto, who has entered the microscopic level, can feel it. In a short moment, he can cause the enemy's stiffness and paralysis. Ho! With another angry rebuke, Magneto's right hand suddenly pulled back, and a metal building tens of meters high on the island was uprooted. Driven by the incomparable magnetic fluctuations, it blasted such a building towards Su Chen in front of him. Whoosh! The vast building burst into the air, casting a shadow on the ground in an instant, completely covering the figures of Su Chen and others. Magnetic King. The expressions of Emma and others changed. At this moment, they finally understood why Magneto was able to lead the mutants forward in the past. This hand is as easy as breathing, throwing architectural skills, which is simply breathtaking. Everyone panicked instinctively and ran away subconsciously. But when it was reflected that the person in front of him was the #1 mutant, Emma and others were relieved that they knew what the #1 mutant was. After a short period of stiffness, even less than half a second, Su Chen, who has evolved infinitely, has acquired magnetic field resistance. Feeling the immense pressure from above, Su Chen sneered and kicked his feet on the ground, and the whole figure flew into the air like this. Boom! With his relaxed punch, such a huge building exploded like this. Under the bombardment of this terrifying force, the wreckage of the building continued to be thrown down from the sky like flowers and rain in the sky. But under a wave of invisible mental power fluctuations, the wreckage of these buildings that were thrown away wantonly, suddenly and continuously shot at the Magneto on the ground like a cannonball. Boy! Magneto gritted his teeth, and the magnetic field fluctuations in his body continuously manipulated the flying building debris. But at this moment, the line of sight in his eyes suddenly flashed, and a terrifying killing intent hit his face like this, and Magneto realized that the opponent's figure had been volleyed and killed. Don't underestimate people. Magneto King Eric constantly strengthened his physique with magnetic fluctuations. In the blink of an eye, his body strength has surpassed the theoretical limit of the human body. His right hand was in front of him, and a light shield like a sanctuary was formed in front of him. This is a position that can isolate matter and energy. Through this position, he can even resist the threat from a nuclear explosion. But the figure killed in front of him had already completely walked out of the baptism of the nuclear explosion, and his tempered and unparalleled physique crashed into this stand barrier. Click! Under just one face, the barrier was full of cracks like glass. Less than half a second. The sanctuary supported by Magneto King's full strength was smashed head-on. Su Chen's figure blasted at him like this, with a bang. Just relying on a simple physical impact, it made him like a broken sandbag. Like throwing away hundreds of meters away. Quote. Diaresis Magneto. Oh my god. The complexions of the members of the Brotherhood of Mutants changed drastically, and they ran to the ground in the distance to meet the poor king. Under the attack of the overly young mutant number 1, the once out-of-the-art Magneto fell to the ground like a poor old man dying. Although I am in a relatively empty environment like an island, not a skyscraper in a city, so that the magnetic fluctuations did not cause much momentum and suffered a lot of environmental losses. However, feeling the opponent's understatement and ease of action, everyone knew that Magneto might not have any chance of winning. Even the personnel brought by the other party did not have much fear and panic when the building was blasted down just now. Good Zhao, this is undoubtedly the trust in the young king. The winner has already been decided. The new and old generations of kings have been completed in this way. This is the handover of the times. Our king will finish the spear for the rest of the road. Emma Frost said as a pious fangirl looked forward to. Even though she is 7 years older than the other party, but behind Su Chen, she has completely ignored the other party's age. This is a trustworthy man and the king of mutants. Despair. The sound of footsteps resounded so clearly on the ground, and Su Chen's figure slowly walked towards the fallen body of Magneto. There are brothers who want to interfere, but they are shocked by his aura, but they dare not move. At last, but there was a woman flying in from the sky. She said very nervously, "Let him go and let him take care of his retirement. I am willing to be loyal to you." The figure flying from the sky is surrounded by red waves. A red windbreaker, coupled with a fire-like red waist, is the image of an imperial sister. Wanda. When the members of the Brotherhood all around saw the visitor, their complexions suddenly changed. Everyone obviously knew this woman. After all, this is the daughter of Magneto, Wanda, known as the Scarlet Witch. Let him go. Wanda glanced at the figure lying down on the ground, already completely unconscious, his expression a little unnatural and unbearable. A magnificent magnet king, the mutant leader was so bloody and completely stunned. The violent injury also completely dissipated the magnetic fluctuations in his body, so that his face once again glowed with a sense of oldness. Magneto is old. Obviously, he couldn't stand such a fierce blow. If it weren't for a breath, he would be judged dead by Wanda. After seeing the person who came, Emma's complexion changed, and she immediately reminded, "This is the Scarlet Witch." According to the assessment, this woman's mutant strength is at least Omega level. She didn't remind Su Chen to be careful, but it was indeed a good thing to signal that this woman was willing to fall under his command. Su Chen raised his brow slightly because he felt a familiar wave from the woman with red waist long hair in front of him. That is the weird energy fluctuation that interferes with reality. This woman can also distort reality and tamper with everything. This was the first time he met other people who had the ability to rewrite reality. Good. There was a hint of interest in Su Chen's black and white eyes. Prove your worth. This is not enough if you want to successfully cast your name. Wanda the Scarlet Witch pondered for a while, and after taking a deep breath, a terrifying force of interference acted upon reality. She was born with an Omega-level ability to modify probability, coupled with the chaos magic that she was given. The Scarlet Witch has since been able to rewrite reality under the violent mood swings. Outside the island, everyone can immediately see a wave rising like a city wall. Tsunami. If there is a 1% probability that this island will encounter a tsunami this season, then the Scarlet Witch interferes with reality in this way, forcibly distorting the invisible value, reaching 100%. In this way, she changed the tidal law and called a rare tsunami to this island. This scene is enough to demonstrate her strength. Su Chen was very satisfied with this. Amidst the panic of the people on the island, he waved his hand casually, and another wave of interference in reality rippled around. Boom. Far away, it seemed like a wave swept by thousands of horses, and it collapsed like this. Puff. Wanda the Scarlet Witch spouted blood. Let's go. Su Chen's figure just turned and left. A vast space ripples rippling around his body, and a space shuttle gate is supported by this. Looking at the other person's eyes, Wanda the Scarlet Witch suddenly knew that he had passed the level. In the high air, a giant aircraft carrier resembling an island was lifted from its stealth state, and a Harrier-shaped fighter jet flew out from the deck of the aircraft carrier. Obviously, The plane to pick up all the members and supplies of the Brotherhood of Breeders has arrived quickly. Soon, only Magneto was left alone in this Atlantic island. Thousands of meters high in the sky, the aircraft carrier, supported by 4 anti-gravity engines, gallops through the air in this way. Su Chen's figure just descended here. Many backbone members of mutants also began to gather on this aircraft carrier. Su Chen, who has gathered a large number of mutants in a short period of time, needs a formal organization name and action plan at this moment to command more and more subordinates. Utopia, single quote. This is the name of the power set by Su Chen. As for its elite backbone, under Emma's suggestion, define their respective code names and positions in the way that Hellfire Club used to play chess in the past. Bishop, a clone. Chariot, Red Tank. Knight, Electronics. Queen, Emma. There are 2 groups of black and white, with a total of 32 chess pieces, in order to commend the members who will be outstanding in the next battle. Under the confusion, it can even be said that the butterfly effect, and even under the correction of the timeline in the dark, Emma thus won the title of White Queen. As for the only king title, it naturally refers to Su Chen. Of course, it is called king outside. Everyone also uses supreme to respectfully call the king of mutants. As for the other structures of the Utopia organization, it will be specifically improved by professionals. Supreme, we have found a lot of superheroes and SHIELD agents' activities on the West Coast. It's like mutants have been gathering on the East Coast. On the West Coast, a large number of superheroes appeared, and under the guidance of the Council and SHIELD, they began to restructure new forces. It is said to be called the West Coast Avenger. Humph. The Avengers have only just been established, and they died like this. Are you embarrassed to continue to reorganize it now? Everyone looked a little disdainful and a little angry. The other party is determined to use the name of the Avengers, isn't the natural object of revenge as themselves. This is an unforgivable thing, and it is also a bright and provocative act. A major discovery is that there is a crippled file off-sentry robot, in the information that was deciphered not long ago. There is evidence that this is a robot designed to exterminate all mutants. Follow the description of mutant electronics. Everyone immediately realized that the sentry robot could actually imitate the mutants' ability to fight against the mutants. This is a horrible existence that has been transformed by using the gene of the witch-like girl and the replication ability of the Rakshasa girl. At least tens of thousands of mutant human X genes that the military has mastered can add various capabilities to the sentry robot. Everyone looked very embarrassed. Such a highly intelligent sentry robot can replicate the ability to restrain mutants, which is simply disgusting. So it is. Su Chen looked indifferent after listening to it. He heard how these sentry robots fight with him are somewhat similar. It's just that the opponent restrains the enemy by copying the ability. Once the sentry robot has formed a scale, coupled with the huge X gene library, we will definitely lose out. Emma gritted her teeth. Not to mention, the reason why the other party has such a huge X gene pool is obtained from the live anatomy of our mutants. Hear the words. Even Su Chen's brows wrinkled slightly, and he thought of the scalpel raised by the doctor in white in the laboratory very unhappy. Also, since SHIELD is still dying to resist, then I don't mind raising the West Coast to the ground. Start to conquer the world now. The disclosure of the sentry robot's plan immediately made all mutants suddenly vigilant. For a time, a group of elite backbones were transferred and began to rush to the West Coast. Whoosh! In the completely occupied Stark Industrial Group, there are frames of steel suits that continue to be produced in batches of assembly lines. Soon, quite a few people just wore marked steel suits, and apart from rushing to the front line, it was to maintain the sphere of influence of the capital city of Yorkton. When cracking the central computer of the Stark Work Group, Mutant Electronics also discovered a key problem, that is, artificial intelligence Jarvis has disappeared. And he also learned the rudiment of a plan. That is Tony's attempt to build a steel army that covers the world in order to maintain world peace. The artificial intelligence responsible for leading this plan needs to be recultivation and incubation. According to Tony's preliminary vision, this artificial intelligence can update its program according to the characteristics of the opponent, and evolve a method of restraining the opponent. Is it a familiar sight? The mutant screamed electronically, and instantly knew that Tony had gotten inspiration from Supreme. Are you sure you found Tony Stark's body? Yes, it's all rotten. That world-famous pit has almost become the ruins of Utopia, symbolizing the new life and future of mutants. Some of the bodies buried inside have naturally been excavated. Tony Stark, who was covered in torn armor, was already dead. Why should he ask so solemnly? Mutant Electronics had a solemn face, gritted his teeth and said, Tony may not be dead, everyone must be careful. How is this possible? Everyone has seen the corpse. Can it be possible that an ordinary person on the other side can be reborn in Nirvana? You don't understand. Upload the consciousness network and combine your own brain waves to generate intelligent artificial intelligence. Tony is very likely to rejuvenate with this. As knowing the use of all electronic devices, the mutant electronic nemesis can be said with certainty. Because this is a lesson learned. In the Cracked Shield computer network, there is a record of a past scientist Anam Zola uploading his consciousness on a network after his death. Since this guy can do it, Tony Stark must have a backhand once he figured it out. Then how do we find each other? Everyone naturally admires this electronics who worked on cracking a large number of devices and was promoted to the White Knight, and there is no doubt that there is him. Don't worry about these, I will try to find traces of their existence on the internet. Mutant Electronic gritted his teeth. If he guessed correctly, Tony Stark must be hiding somewhere, preparing to cast a brand new body. What? At this time, the Mutant Electronics frowned and said, there were many mutants killed in the riverside streets of Yorkton. Go and see what happened. He mobilized surveillance, and gradually caught a man in a hospital gown and killed him everywhere in the street. And the horror of death was extremely tragic. What a monster this is. Yorkton City. On the banks of the Hudson River and the riverside streets that meander across the city, a man in a hospital gown has just so unscrupulously killed his compatriots. Sorry, if I don't kill you, Geller won't let me out. A big man pretended to be awkward and yelled in a child's voice. Looking at the shattered figure beside him, the mutants who rushed in front of him only felt his horror. Help me. What's even more shocking is that the hospital gown in front of me was actually holding a toy in the hands of the other person. It yelled in the opponent's hand and struggled happily. But that is not a toy at all. But a steel battle suit that was alive in the air, together with the pilot in it, was completely reduced by this terrifying guy and turned into a toy in his hand. It's so fun, so fun. The man in the hospital gown held up the toy in his hand and kept shaking. Seeing the diminishing figure struggling in the palm of his hand, he laughed completely brilliantly, just like a big innocent boy. What? He suddenly yelled. Click. However, his right hand was a little stronger, and the toy in his hand was squeezed into the palm of his hand. Blood came out of the gaps in the small armor. David threw it out disgustingly, and wiped his blood-stained right hand on his striped gown. Not good. Uncle Geller, does this count as killing a person or not? David's innocent face suddenly became tangled. Do not care. He gestured his fingers, pointed at the figure in front of him, and said, kill you all, it's enough to make up. A terrible killing intent permeated the streets of the river in this way, and even the warm wind from the river could not be completely blown away. I'm here, so hurry up and hide. David was jumping around and was a mentally ill person, but everyone couldn't laugh out loud. Because the man who smiled the happiest just now blended into the stone tablet, and his head and two hands were exposed, and his death was tragic. A mutant was constantly running out by moving fast, but a terrifying force turned him into an ant-like body, making him gallop extremely slow, and then he was trampled to death on the ground by David. Before the other mutant uttered a panic cry, a stream of blood spewed from the 5 orifices, and his head was inexplicably embedded in his stomach. David began to show off his artistic talents. Jump and jump, so happy. Is it fun? At this time, a cold word came from not far behind him, and a man in a black sweater walked out of the ripples in the space. What? It seems to smell like an old man. David suddenly stopped beating and turned around, looking curiously at Su Chen who had suddenly come. He sniffed his nose and sighed secretly, you killed the old man. No, it's clear that the old man is not dead, and his thoughts are still fluctuating. It's really weird. But, in the next second, his cheerful face suddenly became serious. I was going to play peekaboo with the old man, you should return it to me soon. The ruthless words just fell. The childish-looking boy in the hospital gown suddenly changed, and his expression suddenly became extremely cruel. Personality switches naturally. Dark-faced personality. Geller made his debut. He moved his nose slightly, and for a while, the dead souls and consciousness around him turned into a plume of blue smoke and was sucked into his body. This is also an ability of David Charles Haller. He can take the initiative to absorb the consciousness and abilities of other people to generate new abilities in his body, but even if he does not absorb the consciousness of others, a new personality will automatically be born in David's own mind. Every personality is a new ability. This also means that David himself is adding new superpowers all the time, and there is no limit at all. So the interesting place is here. Su Chen in front of him is a person with infinite evolution ability. He is constantly changing and evolving. The David in front of him is infinitely capable. Infinite evolution versus infinite ability. Humph. Die to me. David took the lead. Suddenly, the earth suddenly cracked and turned into countless mud. The river on the side suddenly rolled up, turning into streams of water rushing. At this moment, the natural element seems to be reduced to the weapon of the monster in front of him. Su Chen, who was under attack, was still indifferent and calm. His cold eyes looked at the person in front of him like this. He could feel the elemental fluctuations in the weather, and for an instant, a wave of energy lingered in his body. Do not forget, he can absorb and release any form of energy from the outside world. For a time, the earth element and water element were all pulled away, turned into pure energy and poured into the body. The water dragon collapsed, and the tumbling mud couldn't continue to flow. Su Chen raised his right hand, and the tip of his index finger turned the swallowed elemental energy into a pure light beam and then pierced the air. Whoosh! The harsh whistling sound cut through the air like this. The beam of light came so quickly that it penetrated a blurry afterimage. In an instant, David, who was moving instantaneously, appeared beside Su Chen. He sneered, raised his right hand, turned into a hand knife, and slashed away like this. Too slow, Su Chen said coldly. His icy eyes have extraordinary dynamic vision abilities, which are specially used to capture figures with ultra-high speed. Click. Not to mention, Su Chen, who has an excellent body, came first, and his right hand held David's wrist in this way. With a click, Su Chen squeezed his wrist like a ball of mud without mercy. Subsequently, he grabbed his wrist even more, just like throwing a piece of rubbish, throwing it out mercilessly. Whoosh! David's poor body was like a tattered doll, cutting through the asphalt on the riverside street all the way, smashing several buildings behind one after another. Ha 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 ha, enjoyable. It didn't even take a breath. In the ruins, a deformed monster like a creeping species crawled out of the smoke. David's limbs were extremely twisted. Obviously, the injury just now was enough to severely damage him, completely displacing his whole body's bones, and even his head was about to fall from his neck. But with the sound of frying beans, this deformed monster suddenly turned over and turned into a normal human body again. The cuts and bruises all over his body healed so quickly. Yes, no wonder I can teach the old man a lesson. David was very satisfied. Then, he began to whisper grinningly, "Hey, hello, wake up all for me, look at the family members we are about to welcome." For a time, the aura of his body is getting higher and higher. The surging majestic power is getting thicker, and the aura of the whole person is getting thicker and thicker. In the blink of an eye, he has undergone earth-shaking changes. Interesting. Su Chen raised his eyebrows. If you just look at it with your eyes, you can't get an insight into what happened to the other party. However, from the spiritual perception involving the spiritual level, I suddenly found that the other party's body was surrounded by demonic souls. They surrounded David and opened a grinning smile at Su Chen himself. At this moment, he finally realized what the other's family members meant. Feelings are about killing oneself, and annexing one's soul and consciousness. Die. David suddenly launched a fierce attack at this moment. There was a sudden violent tremor in the air, and a burning meteorite was summoned out of thin air. The earth trembled even more, and the previous elemental fluctuations swept once again. The storm turned into a fierce blade storm that swept Su Chen's body. The destruction of ultrasound, terrible mental attack, mind fluctuations, even the real space began to distort and collapse. This moment, David launched hundreds of attacks on his own. Do everything with one heart and one mind. The attacks were carried out one after another at the same time, without any ventilation at all. Yes, at this moment, he alone is a legion. This is why he is called the Great Group, the Legion, and even the Army. Boom! Surging attacks followed one after another. Su Chen's lingering energy fluctuations became more and more violent, and the whale swallowed the energy around him. Boom! The thought power fluctuation that bloomed in his mind turned into an air cannon, and a meteorite from the sky was blasted to pieces out of thin air. Meteor fire rain suddenly sprinkled from the sky, like a firework feast. Su Chen's figure is so alone under the constant fluctuations in his ability to attack frequently. At this moment, his genes are constantly changing, and restrained resistance is continuously generated from external stimuli at a rapid pace. Spirit resistance plus 50. Energy devour plus 100. Body strength plus 100. In order to cope with too frequent energy waves, and even to further accelerate the speed of swallowing, even the internal structure of the body began to undergo some transformation. Ha! Su Chen just slammed on the ground, abruptly smashing the energy fluctuations, and hitting the figure in front of him with a punch. At this time, he can feel that reality is beginning to be distorted, as if someone is trying to fix the probability of hitting, but it is a pity that David, a single Omega-class reality modification ability, is obviously not as good as Su Chen. He should never use this trick. Boom! Su Chen's punch still hit the red heart, smashing his face completely like a tattered watermelon. Humph! With a dull laugh, David used another Omega-class ability, Damage Transfer. This conceptual ability actually transferred the injuries caused by Su Chen to a stray dog. Boom! The stray dog headshot and died instantly. Come on, let me see if you are strong or I am strong. Be obedient, and be one of us obediently. Buildings collapsed one after another. The water of the river meandering around the city evaporated completely under the strange heat. No one dared to imagine that the scene of the battle between the two was so exaggerated. Oh my God, who is that? You can set off such a huge offensive by yourself. It's like a person is a legion. Too terrifying. It's hard for everyone to imagine that one person can trigger hundreds of energy fluctuations at the same time. Is this multitasking? This is one-minded one. The Supreme will be fine, right? It's hard to say. That guy is too cruel. Many mutants looked horrified, and the aftermath of the fighting almost flattened houses on many streets. The ground broke apart, as if it were an earthquake, and the cracks that appeared on the ground even spread to most of the city. What's even more exaggerated is that a meteorite exploded in the air just now, and it sprinkled the fire and rain, completely smashing through the roofs of a city. And the instigator of all this is the strange man in a hospital gown, who escaped from the mental hospital alive. Nonsense, don't show up the ambition of others, Supreme will not lose. Seeing everyone's confidence began to waver, a mutant couldn't help but blurt out cursing. Boom, it's too late to say, then it's fast. There was another loud noise in the distance. David attacked again. The yin bird's laughter kept coming out of his mouth, as cold as a night owl. At this moment, more and more personality and consciousness appeared in his mind. Oh my God! At this moment, the White Queen Emma, who was far away, could also see demonic ghosts lingering all over the enemy. As if they were surrounded by ghosts, every incarnation of personality stared at the Su Chen in the fierce battle in front of him. It is conceivable that under this kind of incomparable gaze, just a glance will make you feel extremely creepy, and the spirit will usher in an extremely tingling pain. But even so, Su Chen is like a okay person, just like a dancer dancing on the tip of a knife. He is so easy to calm down under hundreds of attacks. The slender and thin figure lingers with light fluctuations, but until now, the opponent's attack has not penetrated the thin energy light film, and a black sweater even did not stain a trace of dust under the incentive battle just now. Kid, die to me. David roared. He really couldn't bear the calm and composure of the other party, a calm face in his grasp. He suppressed the previous frenzied bombing, knowing that it was meaningless to send energy to the opponent. This moment, he changed his strategy. Attempt to kill it with one blow. Multiple Omega-level abilities continue to emerge. The space completely solidified in a moment. The flow rate of air molecules also stagnates. The exploding fireworks stopped in full bloom, the water droplets hovered in the air and stopped moving, and everything came to a halt at this moment. It's like a movie that is playing completely presses the pause button. Stop. Come on, plunge into the arms of our family. David sneered. The personality in his mind is constantly making different sounds. Welcome, cute boy, I like him, let him come soon. It was chaotic and noisy, but David had long been accustomed to the sounds of his family. The more lively the better, this will have the taste of home. Ha! His figure flew out instantly and came directly in front of Su Chen. David didn't have much at all. He directly illusioned with one hand, trying to penetrate the solid shell of the opponent in this imaginary state, and directly squeezed the opponent's hard shell with one hand, hard. David grinned grimly. His eyes were full of madness, and the excitement made his throat tremble constantly, and he knew that he was about to acquire the other's consciousness and soul. But at this time, a warning sign rose from the body's instinct. Instinct told him to shrink. What's the situation? David's mind trembled, hesitating between instinct and craving. Not good. Less than a moment, the various personalities in his mind screamed. Run fast. Su Chen, who was stopped at this moment, turned a pair of eyes and stared at the approaching figure. Wrong. It was obvious that the molecular velocity around him was completely frozen, and time still stopped moving, but Su Chen, who was in front of him, broke the routine like this, suddenly stretched out his hand and squeezed his fist and slammed his fist to the opposite side. David, with his various personalities constantly screaming at his head, frowned, and his body was completely virtualized in time, but the punch completely pierced a layer of air. David sneered, never flinching anymore. He wants to get each other. Since then, his other arm that was faintly imagining stretched out towards the opponent, and it was completely materialized when it was about to penetrate into his body, so as to avoid squeezing the opponent's internal organs. Whoosh! But at this time, within this reachable distance of each other, Su Chen's other hand still stretched out, trying to grab the other's wrist. Click! This time, it actually worked. Not good. David was shocked. The first and second attacks took less than half a second, and the last fist was completely empty, but the next time, Su Chen's other hand just held the opponent's illusory arm. Molecular mimicry, I will too. Su Chen sneered, just like fishing for a fish in a river, setting off waves of ripples like water ripples, completely salvaging him from the weird state. Then, another punch blasted out, directly blasting towards the opponent's body. It's useless. An idea just came to David's mind. Boom! In front of his body, blood mist burst out, and his figure blasted into the ruins far away like a cannonball. This time, the conceptual ability of damage transfer has ceased. He couldn't turn on the body of the opponent who was close, nor could he turn to other places. This must be something wrong. He lay down on the ground, his twisted body began to heal superbly. Fool. Single quote. It's resistance, the opponent's body has targeted resistance. Single quote. Yes, remember what happened to shitting just now. Single quote. Rows of noisy words kept popping up, and David's eyes reddened, and he finally realized that the opponent had indeed drew nourishment from the battle and completed the transformation. Otherwise, it will not be restricted by the time stop. If I attack faster, do not. It's not that I'm slow. It's that the speed of the opponent's evolution is too fast. One more time, I remember that I swallowed up a little devil called amplification, not long ago. Who is it? Come forward to me quickly. David immediately began to collect abilities. With so many abilities and so many personalities, it took a lot of time to find out that coward. But at this time, Su Chen in front of him had already shuttled there, not giving him a chance to get up, and suddenly stepped on his waist, completely stomping off his waist, and there was even a terrifying pit on the ground. Step on whatever you want. But this David didn't care at all. He vomited blood and made faces at Su Chen in a crazy way. The broken wounds healed quickly at a speed visible to the human eye. David is too lazy to say anything. He doesn't care about the injury. After all, he has become a mass of blood and can be merged and reorganized. But at this time, Su Chen stopped attacking with a sneer on his face, and a cold chill flashed in his eyes. His right hand just grabbed the other person's head. David showed you a casual look. Anyway, you hit and scolded. He, a mentally ill patient, didn't care at all, and he even burst into laughter. But the next second, do not. There was a trace of badness in his heart. David suddenly yelled, and his whole body began to struggle as hard as possible. Because at this time, Su Chen's right hand was actually pulled out of the opponent's head and a smoky soul emerged. It was an external consciousness that David had devoured. Among them is the ability of injury transfer. Just when this consciousness was completely removed, David's body suddenly lost this Omega-class ability. No wonder he was so resistant at this moment. Ha! A ball of fireworks appeared in Su Chen's hand, burning the soul that had been drawn away completely, and did not give the other party a chance to absorb it again. Whoosh! He directly shuttled through the space, trying to escape Su Chen's attack. But in less than a second, Su Chen's eyes had insight into the changes in space, and appeared directly beside him like a god predicting. What? David was taken aback and tried to escape again. But before his body was completely saturated by the spatial ripples, Su Chen's neck was grasped by Su Chen, and he was lifted out of it like a poultry. Didn't you say it was so happy just now? Su Chen said blankly. He scratched his right hand again, and raised multiple personality consciousness from his head at once. Some of his imprisoned personalities were very grateful for Su Chen's actions, while other self-generated personality consciousness cursed Su Chen like a ghost screaming. Su Chen can naturally hear the abuse involving the spirit, he sneered, and fireworks burst out and burned clean. Come, show me how many healing abilities you have. His calm words heard in David's ears like death urging his life. He didn't even know why the other party was able to restrain himself so much. How could he produce such a vicious withdrawal method? David looked worried. To this end, even continuing to worry, the personality consciousness of the majors began to struggle. Time stopped again. Reality is distorted by this. The space even collapsed to form a collapsed black hole. But a series of super conceptual abilities didn't work for this guy at all. In the surrounding environment where the time stopped, Su Chen just walked in such a leisurely manner, and kept walking forward. Name: Su Chen. Race: human. System: gene information feedback system. The protagonist creates, the non-system chooses the protagonist, but the protagonist creates the system. Characteristics: immortal physique. Even when turned into a granule cell, it can quickly heal and regenerate. Infinitely evolving genes. Genes are evolving all the time. Any external stimulus can promote gene transformation and generate targeted restraint ability. Using ability will also promote ability evolution. Ability: 1. Read motivation. Laboratory awakening broke out. 2. Rewrite reality. Can interfere with reality, tamper with reality, increase probability, laboratory awakening and bursting birth. 3. The body of unparalleled steel. Nuclear explosion, close combat, and even continuous refinement and evolution in the Hulk battle. 4. Energy absorption and utilization, capable of being born during a nuclear explosion. 5. The eye of insight, seeing the gaps and cracks of the spatial structure, the awakening ability to deal with the enemies of space teleportation. 6. Laser, hot sight, new ability to deal with laser eye awakening. 6. Mind barrier and mind system ability to deal with Professor Charles, and the mind system ability of the awakening of the Black Phoenix. 6. Magic resistance, to deal with the awakening of Taj Mage. 7. Divine resistance, awakens when dealing with Thor in Asgard. 8. Time resistance, cannot be stopped by time. 9. Time retrospect passive, to deal with Wolverine that reverses the future. 10. To be added, if any omissions can be reminded in the comment area. Interpersonal relationship: younger sister Susan, friend super killer. Organization established: Utopia. Elite backbone, members named after chess pieces. Men: Red Tank, Doppelganger, Mutant Electronic, Emma the White Queen, Wanda the Scarlet Witch. Sphere of influence: East Coast, the capital city Yorkton. Possessing science and technology: a shield aircraft carrier, a steel legion built by Mark Armour, and some technological information left by Mr. Fantastic Reed. The Supreme has won. That guy was hurt so badly just now. I was wrong. I dared to question the strength of the Mutant King just now. There is a lot of discussion about the variants that watch the battle from a distance. The situation turned abruptly. Who could have imagined that a mental patient who could perform hundreds of miracles by a single person with a wave of offensive just now was beaten to the point of crying and crying? It was not an opponent at all. Do not, David cried out in pain. Su Chen, who walked safely from time to time, grabbed the opponent's body again, and pulled out a bunch of conscious personality from his mind again with one hand. Compared to the last time, this time, dozens of conscious personalities were picked up by Su Chen. once more exaggerated. Under Su Chen's unparalleled evolutionary genes, every opponent caught in a protracted battle will find himself reduced to a frog in warm water. A variety of abilities will only prompt Su Chen to make up for more shortcomings and evolve more restraint methods. It takes at least tens of millions of years for natural animals to evolve. But Su Chen's evolutionary time has compressed this extremely long time to the extreme. That's why Professor Charles marveled as a super Darwin physique. At least this bug-like ability was stopped by Su Chen in a short moment, and he was able to move at will in the domain where the molecular flow rate completely stagnated. While the opponent was struggling to death, with more delays in fighting, Su Chen's infinite evolutionary genes have transformed into more targeted restraint methods. Soul plus 200. Soul plus 200. The consciousness that David swallowed outside and even his self-derived personality were all grasped by Su Chen. Soon, he lost all his healing ability, like a bereaved dog, covered in blood, just fell to his knees on the ground and screamed in pain. The dark side personality that has always been dominating is still screaming. But Su Chen has no patience to give to each other. Click, he suddenly stepped on his foot, slamming the opponent's head fiercely. Su Chen didn't bother to care about what was left of the opponent's abilities. Despair, he snapped his fingers. The fluctuations that interfered with reality then turned into a ruthless force of obliteration, completely obliterating his existence. Infinite ability versus infinite evolution. Obviously, David was completely defeated. Congratulations to Supreme. The tall figure of Emma, the White Queen, was the first to walk up. For the title of Supreme, everyone began to get acquainted with each other consciously. This is the son of Professor Charles, a true schizophrenic. According to his perception and judgment, Professor Charles is not dead. Su Chen said coldly. This, Emma, the White Queen, naturally heard about the Supreme's uproar at Xavier College of Genius. Professor Charles, the master of the soul, died. But not dead. Improbable. At least the students who rushed to the academy were sure that Professor Charles was dead, and his body was completely annihilated and dissipated by the Black Phoenix that was out of control. Suddenly, as a psychic person inferior to Professor Charles, Emma the White Queen suddenly understood how the other party survived. Birth weight. People with strong mind system ability can indeed make their own consciousness parasitize other people's bodies. This doesn't sound like what Professor Charles would do. Just facing the hope of rebirth, can the benevolent and peaceful Charles only refuse at the last minute? I will let people pay attention. Emma, the White Queen, suddenly left an eye on her. Su Chen didn't care much. After all, a former subordinate was defeated. Okay, get ready to go. The arrival of David the Infinite Power is just an episode. According to the original plan, the mutants under the Utopian camp will attack across a continent and attack an island called Alcatraz on the west coast. Worthington Pharmaceuticals. This biopharmaceutical company produces a drug that can completely inhibit the mutant X gene. As long as it is hit by an injection, the mutant can be completely incapacitated within a few seconds. Mutant electronics. Words are really surprising. Permanent failure. The newly joined Scarlet Witch Wanda frowned. Not necessarily. There are not enough samples, but according to my scientific and rigorous probability estimation, the approximate duration may be at least several months. This sentence completely changed the complexion of the mutants around. This is fatal. The drug effect is much stronger than the inhibitory drugs that have appeared in the past. It's the Sentry robot, it's the X-gene suppression potion. How much do these humans have? And the son of General Stryker, Jason Stryker. After the Avatar said, he glanced at Su Chen in the first seat. After all, General Stryker, who was annihilated by the catastrophe fluctuations, was a supreme enemy. And Jason Stryker is the famous illusion master. He has been manipulated by his father in the past, and his ability even prevents Professor Charles from getting rid of the illusion. Not to mention, some of the substances extracted from his brain can make mutants become subordinates who listen to words. There is evidence that the Master of Illusion was also secretly gathered by S.H.I.E.L.D. Bureau. The trace is unknown so far. No matter how, Worthington Pharmaceuticals, which has been thoroughly discovered the secret conspiracy, must take the lead in uprooting, in order to deter the increasingly rampant anti-mutant forces. Alcatraz. In the past, this cell was used to hold heavy prisoners. After more than a decade of being abandoned, it was successfully bought by Worthington Pharmaceuticals. Before this, President Worthington even threatened to treat every mutant's disease and let them return to normal lives. Yes, many mutants who suffer from discrimination and social injustice also think that they are ill. After all, some mutants have physical defects, such as witches, nightcrawlers and so on. There are also abilities defects, mutants who cannot close and open their own abilities as they like. For example, the laser eye is a typical example. It cannot close by itself and can only rely on tactical eyepieces. There are also Ruksha girls, who can't make contact with people's normal skin. Of course, more people who went to treatment in the past were just to avoid being discriminated against and not to be oppressed by unfair society. Mutant's X gene is not a disease. You don't need treatment at all. At this moment, an aircraft carrier suspended high in the sky just released its invisibility, and a black shadow completely enveloped Alcatraz Island. This, oh my God, isn't that an aircraft carrier from S.H.I.E.L.D.? All personnel of Worthington Pharmaceutical Group on Alcatraz Island suddenly felt extremely confused. But soon, they all realized that the current S.H.I.E.L.D. Bureau has long existed in name only, and the aircraft carrier has been completely divided by the mutant forces and the Hydra forces. It's an enemy attack. This moment, they suddenly realized something was wrong. That black shadow shrouded in this way, and the falling sun's rays were completely obscured by this huge sky aircraft carrier. Click. At the bottom of the aircraft carrier, a turret stretched out like this, and the terrifying muzzle was tilted at an angle, aimed at all the defense facilities outside Alcatraz Island. To count the details, the exposed barrels alone are more than hundreds. No one thought that the utopian mutant forces were so rampant, and the aircraft carrier that came directly began to bombard. Every muzzle began to brew light, and the cosmic energy extracted from the cosmic cube was continuously ejected under the panic cry of the people below. Boom! The dazzling light beam just started bombing. Under the brilliant beam of light, all the defensive facilities outside Worthington's headquarters building, and even a ship in the sea area, completely exploded under the bombardment of light, turning into orange-red flames. The island itself has been bombarded, and it continues to crumble. Just the first round of bombing completely disintegrated all the defense systems built before the entire Alcatraz Island. Since they want to promote mutants as a disease, and want to destroy our X gene ability, let them be completely annihilated in history. Emma the White Queen said indifferently. Alcatraz Island used to be an island prison for serious prisoners. The establishment of such a pharmaceutical industry base in such a place is undoubtedly a great ironic metaphor for mutants. After the birth of the number one mutant, the mutants who went to Worthington Pharmaceutical Group for treatment began to flee. After all, they initially just wanted to treat discrimination and injustice. Now the mutants have finally risen, and finally stood up from their oppressed position, and everyone suddenly realized that they were not sick at all. However, in order to continue to study the X genes of these mutants, Worthington Pharmaceuticals still forcibly detained them. Now, it is time for utopian forces to come to the rescue. Whoosh! A Harrier fighter continued to accelerate from the deck of the aircraft carrier, and in the blink of an eye, it took off, transporting batches of mutant troops to the ground. It's over, it's over. The personnel of Worthington Pharmaceuticals did not expect that the defense system that was sufficient to deal with Magneto would be completely dismantled in such an instant. Don't want to be rampant. At this moment, a roar resounded like thunder in the sky. Under this terrifying sound wave, I saw a body that was at least a few hundred feet high suddenly standing in the sky and the earth. When his entire face was approaching the aircraft carrier that was in the air, it almost shocked the people on the deck. What is this? This giant is too big. Everyone's vision was completely occupied by his face. Ho! The faint breath from the tip of his nose faintly turned into a hurricane, sweeping directly to the entire aircraft carrier deck, making it difficult to stand. Sink it for me. The giant who came suddenly roared, and the sound seemed to turn into thunder again and rang into the mutant's ears. Whoosh! His stretched arms directly produced a sonic boom when it pierced the air. A Harrier fighter could not avoid it and was directly hit by the thick arm. If the giant hand that obscures the sky and the sun slaps against the entire aircraft carrier, it may sink in an instant. Not good. Emma, the White Queen, was shocked, and her appalling spiritual fluctuations spewed out, trying to disrupt the spiritual realm of the giant. Don't think about it. Wanda was also shocked, and immediately used his own chaotic magic power in surprise. But the giant in front of him just shook his head in pain, his emotions getting more and more irritable. The palm of the chopping hand still came towards the sky aircraft carrier. Under the wave of Wanda's red magic power, it was only slightly blocked, and it tore through the obstacles and continued to attack unimpeded. The Hong Tan K on the deck stared and yelled at the sky. He was very helpless, but he couldn't reach the opponent's body at all. Compared to the opponent, he is as small as an ant. Just when the opponent's arm covering the sky with a black shadow, wrapped in a majestic force, was about to sink the entire aircraft carrier. The giant Goliath suddenly felt that his arm had encountered some obstacles, and he couldn't make any further progress. It's you. Goliath's eyes widened, and suddenly he noticed that in the high sky not far away, a figure just walked out of the ripples of space. He was above the 9 heavens, so he raised his right hand slightly, underlining the invisible power of mind. Resolved this crisis. The giant Goliath had already known who he was most vigilant about during this trip, but he was not as well known as meeting him, but he really felt how much pressure the other party put on, and his heart still sighed. He roared. He was transformed into a giant by PIM particles, but relying on the energy extracted from another dimension, the body's data was increased countless times. He exhausted his strength, and his swaying right hand was constantly competing with the invisible power of thought. Vaguely, he was able to go several meters. But in less than a second, the invisible binding force became stronger and stronger, so firmly grasped on his wrist, completely making his giant hand unable to play. I don't believe it anymore. Goliath the giant couldn't stand the young man who was above the sky just looking down at him like this. He also couldn't stand his own failure. Ever since, the other hand swayed the sky like this, trying to completely knock the opponent's body away. Boom. But at this moment, a huge mind-powered cannonball hit his face so mercilessly. This is undoubtedly a slap in the face. Under the heavy slap, Goliath's body was completely out of balance, and the offensive was so easily resolved. He cursed in his heart, and his expression was extremely embarrassing. I was slapped in the face by someone. But then, Su Chen, who is indifferent and ruthless, seems to be playing with each other. The fluctuations in the power of thought that permeated the void turned into invisible giant hands constantly slapped on his face. A big face is not good. It takes a little effort to pump hard. The ruthless ridicule made Goliath feel ashamed. Mountain. Boom, boom, boom. The invisible giant hand, which was condensed in the air by the fluctuations of thought power, just so ruthlessly slapped on the face of the giant Goliath. Although it is not too fatal, but this kind of slap on the face humiliates one's dignity more than a fatal injury. What a shame! Goliath roared. Under the anger, surging energy fluctuations suddenly surged in the body, and the whole person's breath became thicker and thicker. Along with his own momentum, he saw the giant Goliath's physique increased a lot again. His hands suddenly tore through the power of thought that permeated the surroundings, and he punched the figure in the sky in front of him. Boom! This fist trembled in the void, and the momentum of the impact alone caused waves of aftermath to disperse the white clouds not far away. But the figure hit by the fist just disappeared without a trace, and there was no trace at all. The giant Goliath's eyes suddenly looked forward, only to find that even the aircraft carrier that had just hovered in the air had already flown away, and had risen into the high air in a stealth state. With such a delay, he has completely missed the achievement of crashing the aircraft carrier. Not good. Suddenly, the warning sign in his mind suddenly made him feel a murderous intent coming from behind him. Limited by his huge physique, the turning movement became a little slow, and he had no time to react. Boom! Su Chen, who shuttled out, waved his fist forward. Void trembles. The surging power is pouring out like mountains and seas, and suddenly hit Goliath's back. How big is the gap between the two? One big and one small. One stands in the sky and the earth, like a giant spirit god. The other is just the size of a human being, and in contrast it is as small as an ant. But that's it. Su Chen's punch was actually a loud sonic boom, and Goliath's body suddenly staggered. He only felt a huge force coming from his back, and the internal organs were even more shocking. It was squeezed violently, and it became a ball. Boom! Affected by this tremendous force, his huge figure could not help being pushed forward, stepped on it, and accidentally even collapsed a small half of Alcatraz Island. The other few steps have set off huge waves in the ocean. In the end, under this tremendous force, his huge physique inherited from the dimensional energy was unable to maintain the balance of the body for a while, and suddenly fell forward like a huge mountain collapsed. Boom! As Goliath's knees plunged into the sea like this, the boundless waves flew up. Just as Su Chen was about to move further, he raised his eyebrows suddenly, and his combat instincts already felt that a killing intent was approaching. With his indifferent pair of eyes, he saw the end of the horizon, and a figure full of flames flew over. It's you. This is an old acquaintance. Thunderbolt. In the last catastrophe, the Fantastic Four was almost annihilated, but this guy was knocked out by Su Chen himself in the initial attack for an unknown distance, which made him accidentally get his life back. I want you to die. But now, the Thunderbolt has killed like this. With fireworks all over his body, he was flying fast, flying like a rocket. Not only that, from the ground in the distance, a white light suddenly appeared, and when the light was enlarged, it was a figure enveloping the vast white light and flying in. Okay, very good, I thought you superheroes were completely wilted. There was a hint of interest on Su Chen's indifferent face. Since smashing the opponent's conspiracy and tricks in the First City, killing many Avengers and Fantastic Four members, he has never encountered a superhero again. He thought that these people really endured their temperament, so he swallowed his breath and didn't dare to stand up. Since they dare to provoke their status, then be prepared for death. Let me see how many caddies you have. Su Chen sneered. Facing the attacking figure in flames, his right hand swept the energy fluctuations. He can not only absorb energy, but the release of it can be sent and received by the heart. In the blink of an eye, a vast wave of ice power filled the tip of the right finger. Boom! A dazzling beam of ice power was immediately released from the fingertips, breaking through the void, and crashing into the thunderbolt of fire from a distance. Before continuing to output, the figure that had just flown from the ground just slammed into it like a cannonball. Su Chen raised his hand to support, and with a bang, the whole person was knocked out dozens of distances. Body strength plus 100. Divine power resistance plus 100. The constructed system gives a good feedback on the evolution of genes. Su Chen raised his eyebrows and steadied his figure in the air casually. The man killed in front of him was a god. Mortal. This is a greeting from the Earth god. Hercules, the unreasonable Hercules, didn't seem to want to give the enemy a chance to breathe at all. Apart from anything else, he continued to crash into the figure in front of him. Unlike Thor, who has not yet awakened the power of Odin, Hercules is not a man with a magical weapon. The condensed power of his body has lingered around him, turning into a bright white light. He had already learned that he wanted to fight quickly, so he didn't dare to retain a trace of strength at this moment, and the fluctuations of the divine power in his whole body became higher and higher. In an instant, the figure of Hercules' thick arms hugged Su Chen's figure just like this, and it rushed into the city on the ground far away like a comet. Boom, boom, boom. Under this straight collision trajectory, all the tall buildings in the city were completely crushed. This Earth god is worthy of being a Hercules, and his fighting style is even more aggressive and barbaric. Under the impact of a moment of embracing, a line of straight buildings was completely shattered. He will control Su Chen's physique so firmly, trying to kill him completely under the impact of divine power and the violent collision. Roll, angrily rebuked, and within a second, Su Chen suddenly got up and kicked away the figure in front of him. Divine power resistance plus 500. Body strength plus 300. Divine power absorption plus 200. Awakening. Energy erosion. Awakening. Divine power corrosion. At this moment, Su Chen's infinite evolutionary genes were immediately stimulated. His thin energy light film is full again. This time, it is a faint gray wave, revealing a terrifying wave of death. Ho! Hercules still didn't know what monster he was going to face in the next second. He still swooped down like a tireless bison. But the closer he gets to his opponent, the white divine light released from his body becomes dim, as if he has been corroded by some kind of power. Not good. Chapter 71. Not good. It's too bad. When Herculeston felt like a moth was fighting a fire, the fluctuations of his divine power were dimmed, and the lingering white divine light was suddenly eroded and continuously annihilated. What's wrong? He was a little dazed. The closer you get to the opponent, the more you can feel a terrifying erosion wave in the enemy's body. Once the divine power is touched, it immediately melts away. But Hercules, the violent Hercules, could no longer restrain his speed, and his whole body slammed into the opponent like this. Boom! At this moment, he was like crashing into a huge mountain, and the figure above the air lifted his right hand to support it, and remained motionless under his impact. Impossible. Hercules was stupid. A few seconds ago, he was able to hug his opponent, smashing it to pieces all the way to an unknown number of high-rise buildings. But now in a short period of time, the opponent's physical strength has actually increased to a certain extent. Something's wrong. What shocked him even more was that the divine power fluctuations lingering around him had dimmed. Get out! A scornful smile appeared on Su Chen's indifferent face. Ha! He raised his supporting right hand and squeezed his fist suddenly, and slammed into the Hercules in front of him. Boom! With a loud noise, the body of the Hercules plunged into the ground completely like a meteorite. Under the terrifying impact, a huge crater was formed directly on the surface. Earth God! Su Chen's figure looked like a ghost, and in the blink of an eye, he came to the ground from the sky. Before Hercules got up officially, he grabbed the opponent's neck, and then the whole person grabbed the opponent and soared into the sky. Under the harsh sound of the sonic boom, Su Chen, who was wrapped in thoughts of power fluctuations, directly took Hercules' figure into the deep sky thousands of meters high. The cold wind is biting, and the cold current wind is constantly blowing in the deep sky. Come, show me how strong the Earth God's body is. Su Chen's relentless words made Hercules' heart chill silently. Do not. At this moment, he suddenly realized what the other party was going to do. He struggled hard, but a terrifying throwing force spewed out from the opponent like this. Su Chen tried his best, smashing his body towards the surface with both hands. Whoosh! Hercules' body suddenly fell straight toward the ground like a meteor. Driven by the terrifying speed, it was rubbing the air, and fireworks appeared all over his body, and it hit the surface like a fireball. On a mountain. Boom! Under the force of Su Chen's thrown on the earth, the entire small mountain range over 100 meters high collapsed by more than half. The surging waves of surging power turned into a circular shock wave and uprooted the surrounding trees. The vast smoke and dust swept all around, filling the entire sky. Too ruthless. My goodness. Goliath, the giant who was watching from a distance, was completely stupid. He never thought that the power of a person could be so terrible, but Hercules, an upright earth god, a true god, was just like a rubbish to play with. For a while, he didn't even know whether the organized offense was correct. In a secret base somewhere, the expressions of all S.H.I.E.L.D. personnel who watched the fight outside through satellite equipment in low Earth orbit changed drastically. Its evolution. I reminded Hercules to pay attention to the growth of the opponent in battle, but he was still too reckless. We shouldn't organize this offensive operation. Director Hill's face was completely darkened. After all, she and Agent Collison didn't have much appeal. Even if a group of superheroes are recruited, how can these people be deployed by themselves and others? One relied on the identity of the Earth God, one had a bad temper, and the other was anxious for revenge. As a result, these three people had to be completely accounted for. Hercules should be all right. Everyone is even more worried about this. No, I'm afraid he will be over. No matter how optimistic people are, they can't give the other side the hope of surviving at this moment. At this moment, in the collapsed mountains, Hercules only felt the boundless pain rushing from his whole body's bones. Even his divine body could not be intact under the violent drop action just now. The blood was flowing, and the injury felt extremely painful. Hercules gritted his teeth, and divine power surged into his body again, and he began to repair the mutilated wounds all over his body. What makes him puzzled is why the closer he gets to his opponent, the more bleak the divine power fluctuations in his body, as if his divine power is suddenly evaporated. No, can't continue to fight. He has realized that the opponent's body has the characteristics of restraining his own divine power, and if he continues to fight, he is really afraid to fall. Didn't you just play very happily? Why do you want to leave now? Su Chen's words came from nothing. Whoosh! As he flicked with his hand, the smoke in front of him was slapped away. Hercules just wanted to say something, but suddenly realized that he couldn't speak. His neck was completely tightly bound by the other party's invisible power of thought. He was lifted up in an instant, and then fell onto the opponent's right hand. Come, let you play a set of fun. Su Chen chuckled lightly. His words resounded like a demon in Hercules' ears. Next second, boom, Su Chen hovered all over his mind and flew at high speed in a posture that was almost close to the ground. This is a bitter Hercules. Because Su Chen, who was flying close to the ground, grabbed his neck tightly, pressed him to the ground and slid all the way. At such a fast flying speed, he drew a line of thousands of meters long on the ground. The gap. Puff. Hercules was vomiting blood in pain. He did not expect that his actions had been retaliated against by the other party before. What made him even more desperate was that he had no room for resistance at all, and the divine power fluctuations that were constantly rising were eroded and dissipated under the lingering energy position around the opponent. In the end, Hercules was more like a shot put, and was thrown fiercely by Su Chen, smashing many buildings far away. Awakening. Energy plasticization. Soon, Su Chen ushered in a new round of evolution. At this moment, the energy fluctuations lingering around his back suddenly turned into a number of monster tail-like tentacles, which hung upside down in the air. There was a wave of annihilation of divine power. This is the deadliest weapon to deal with the existence of divine power. Boom! The crumbling building just collapsed. The smoke rose up. After being thrown as a shot put just now, Hercules smashed several buildings to stabilize his figure. Ho ho! He breathed vigorously, making a sound like a broken bellows. Every breath smelled of blood, and it was obvious that the internal organs had been completely damaged. Hercules has never been as uncomfortable as it is today. He only felt that his breath was extremely sluggish, and everything made himself a wasteful, like Immortal. He tried to cheer up. A torrent of divine power fluctuations flowed in the limbs and hundreds of skeletons, and began to slowly repair his injuries. God will not fall. Hercules gritted his teeth, and now he was determined to stand up from the ruins. But his sluggish fighting instinct was more than a second late before he realized that there was already an extra figure in front of him. Boom! Su Chen stomped on a volley and trampled his standing body into the ruins. This is the Earth God. It's really embarrassing and ridiculous. This ridiculous remark was enough to make Hercules furious, and he couldn't wait to screw the other's head. Can be less than a moment. The warning signs in his mind resounded, and the fighting instinct he had tempered between life and death for countless times had already told himself that the danger had arrived. What is this? Hercules was taken aback, and suddenly realized that Su Chen, who was floating on the ground in front of him, had suddenly released 8 energy tentacles. The sound of breaking through the air. The sharp tentacles plasticized by energy fluctuations suddenly penetrated the void and pierced Hercules' body suddenly. What? This time, Hercules felt extremely painful. What is this? He was stupid. I couldn't believe that the tentacles that pierced through the air actually pierced his divine power shield in an instant. Not only that, even his divine body was stiffly penetrated like paper. It hurts. Herculeston realized that the other party had completely evolved a way to restrain his divine body. Why? Before he died, he wondered why the other party suddenly became so restrained. It is divine resistance again. It is to make the close divine power fluctuations continue to annihilate. At last, he even evolved a pair of energy weapons that could easily penetrate his divine body. OMG, what kind of monster is this? How long did he fight the opponent? Not even a minute or two, but in such a short time, this guy was able to complete 3 rounds of earth-shaking evolution. A existence like you shouldn't live in this world. He spit out grief and anger. Unwilling, Hercules fully felt the injustice of God. Then, there is no more. Along with a graceful arc, and energy tentacles extending from Su Chen's back waist penetrated his head like this. An earth god just fell. That's the case with the gods. Su Chen raised his eyebrows, and the demon tail-like energy tentacles hanging upside down suddenly collapsed, turning into a stream of energy and involved in the body. Next second, he turned and looked back at another flame figure soaring in the air. On the surface of the sea in the distance, the giant Goliath who had just been knocked down by his punch had also stood up. Even if he didn't use the power of the spiritual level, he could feel the hesitation and fear of these two people. At first, the blood surged, and the revenge was eager, understandable. But now seeing the terrifying throw of the number one mutant on the Earth, and even witnessing the fall of the Earth God, the hearts of both of them may have retreated. Why do you want to run? Don't want revenge anymore. Obviously the body is on the ground far away. Obviously it is a shallow whisper. But Su Chen's words were so clear and unmistakable that they lingered in the ears of the two of them. The devil was whispering, Reaper is urging his life. For a moment, both of them were frightened. What? The thunderbolt roared unwillingly, and he was so furious that he was stimulated by Su Chen and recalled the death of his sister and brother-in-law, and even the death of the stone man. The Fantastic Four are almost finished, so he can survive on his own. The trace of timidity that had just risen was immediately thrown away, and this fierce fellow bathed in flames like this, as if a rocket fired. Thunderbolt. This time, the giant Goliath calmed down instead. The gap in strength is like an insurmountable gap. But this is not the most terrible. Hercules clearly saw that the opponent was inferior to himself, and relied on the indestructible divine power fluctuation to force the opponent. Yes, he did it, but it was awe-inspiring for less than 2 seconds. Afterwards, there was a series of abuse. The most terrible thing about the number one mutant obviously lies in the terrifying evolutionary ability. This guy is not a human at all. Diaresis die for me. Thunderbolt has been completely attacked by anger, and at this moment he is coming with the determination to die together. One hit kills in seconds, and does not give the opponent a chance to recover and evolve. The next step was to witness the explosion of a supernova that he might only be able to use once in his life. Whoosh! He braved fireworks all over his body, like a torch, swooping down in a super high-speed flight. At a speed faster than a supersonic cruise aircraft, he quickly circled the surrounding area of Su Chen. He quickly circled the surrounding area. Su Chen, who was in it, was immediately completely surrounded by a large-scale firestorm. The blazing heat wave accelerated. The temperature rises layer by layer. In the surrounding flame storm, Thunderbolt could not even be caught by human eyes. The afterimage dragged by his body can even make a circle. He has burned his life. It is just to form a supernova explosion. For an instant, the ultra-high temperature heat wave even reached good enough millions of degrees Fahrenheit, and the space structure in the flame prison even collapsed for this, and everything here began to collapse. I have the guts, but don't think of yourself too great. Your friends and relatives are just executioners who launch the conspiracy to a complete failure. Su Chen sneered. This man is still too stupid. If you clearly give yourself abilities, then you will naturally laugh at it completely. Although Su Chen, who was in the flame prison at this time, had been approached by the heat waves from all around, the impact of the explosion was constantly surging. But within a moment, the flame resistance continued to increase, and Su Chen, who was basically immune to flames, developed a way to restrain the opponent's heat wave at this moment. The opposite of fire is naturally ice. In an instant, Su Chen's body suddenly spewed out a surging ice energy. With him as the center, within a few miles of it, it was completely reduced to an ice-bound world. He would like to call it the Ice Age. The opposite of fire is naturally ice. When Thunderbolt Fire tried to explode its own supernova, and began to circle around Su Chen's body rapidly, the heat generated by itself was constantly spurring Su Chen's evolution. Under the interference and stimulation of this environment, Su Chen's immortal physique suddenly became full of fire resistance. Gradually began to fire immunity. Then, in order to restrain the more and more terrifying heat wave, the infinitely evolving gene suddenly transformed into a brand new ability. Awakening. Ice control. In an instant, Su Chen had discovered that he had the ability to completely condense the surrounding environment into ice. Didn't think much. The energy stored in the billions of trillions of cells and even the hundreds of limbs in his body suddenly turned into surging ice power, centering on himself, completely radiating out to the surroundings. Boom! The front was wrapped in layers, and the flame prison formed by the continuous rotation was suddenly and completely shattered. Hiss! Under the collision of ice and heat, a large amount of white steam was produced immediately, and the vast steam spray immediately obscured the sky. The ice power was still slightly better after all. After completely offsetting the ultra-high temperature fireworks, it still spread to the surrounding area. At this moment, almost half of the forest area and small half of the city were reduced to ice-covered land. Everything in the world is frozen under an endless layer of ice. The ice age is appropriate. Good. Su Chen is very satisfied. Due to the explosion of the supernova from the thunderbolt, some space has been collapsed, so that this absolute ice-bound force even prevented the continuous collapse of real space. Of course, if the thunderbolt is a bit more fierce, I am afraid that Su Chen's ice-bound power will be further enhanced, freezing the movement of all the molecules so as to achieve the effect of stopping every time. Pity. Su Chen couldn't help but sigh for the enemy's weakness. Listen, this is human words. If you hear the thunderbolt that has completely burned your life, I am afraid you will vomit blood. And far away, in the waters around Alcatraz Island, the giant Goliath who originally stood in the sky has completely disappeared. Yes, this guy had long thought that the poor thunderbolt was just self-defeating. He is not optimistic about him at all. There is even some contempt in my heart. Isn't this giving the other party ability? Unfortunately, as the first superhero to jump out, Goliath himself has already been spotted. Don't think about leaving. In the city adjacent to the sea, Wanda the Scarlet Witch appeared on a street like this. Hearing this, Goliath, who had been relieved of the giant state, immediately looked at the woman who came to obstruct him in anger. A red windbreaker, tall and graceful, with a delicate and beautiful appearance, if it weren't for the magical fluctuations in it, he would have thought it was a female celebrity. A woman, Goliath sneered. One phrase is enough to prove his contempt for this woman. The Scarlet Witch Wanda sneered. She needs merit, needs to be promoted to the management, become the core backbone, and obtain the identity code of the black and white chessboard. Then the best target is naturally this Goliath who doesn't dare to transform into words. Don't underestimate women. The lingering chaotic magic power fluctuations of Wanda the Scarlet Witch suddenly turned into a red magic bullet and fired at the enemy. Just with the momentum of the howling and the momentum of the bombing, Goliath knew that this woman's methods were indeed a bit extraordinary, and in a vague way, she had a threat to herself. He frowned. It is not that he is afraid of this woman, but that he is afraid that the #1 mutant who has finished cleaning up the thunderbolt is about to come. Woman. He didn't even bother to fight each other. Like a trick, the whole figure disappeared in front of him. The red magic bullet that blasted away suddenly lost its target, turning buildings in the distance into ruins. What? Wanda frowned. She vaguely felt that the other party's body was nearby, but why did she suddenly disappear in front of her eyes? He's getting smaller. At the moment this sentence sounded, a slender figure just walked out of the spatial fluctuations like water ripples. Under Su Chen's keen mental perception, he could immediately detect a very unusual life fluctuation nearby. The body can become bigger and smaller. But life fluctuations cannot be erased. Su Chen's eyes suddenly fell on the small ant-like figure on the ground, and a smile appeared on his cold face. In an instant, his clear eyes suddenly glowed with red light, which turned into laser beams and slammed down on the ground. Goliath realized that he had been discovered, and he didn't dare to put it on anymore. He immediately lifted the reduced form of the Pym particle, but he turned into an ordinary human body and still couldn't avoid it for the first time. With a bang, his entire figure was knocked out, and he was hit by a beam of light on the wall of a building hundreds of meters away. Puff! He spouted a mouthful of blood, a terrifying blood hole appeared on his right shoulder, and his trembling right hand was about to press against the enlarged device in his wrist. But at this moment, Goliath's consciousness was completely invaded by a majestic wave of will. It's Emma, the White Queen. With shoulder-length blonde hair and a white chiffon dress, she controlled Goliath's body in this way and did not give the other party any further action. In addition to being able to obtain energy outside of dimensions, Goliath mainly relies on the suit of his body to become bigger and smaller. This is Pym particle technology. Emma, the White Queen, walking from the street in the distance, revealed Goliath's secret. A generation of Ant-Man Hank Pym has a great relationship with the Shield of the last century, so you can believe that the Ant-Man team has joined them. Emma, the White Queen, walked slowly to Su Chen's side. Wanda cursed secretly from the bottom of his heart, and was exposed to the show again by this woman. And far in the northern part of the Earth in a glacier snow area, a secret base of N-37 repaired in the underground ice layer is buried there. Like other numbered bases, this is also a secret facility built by S.H.I.E.L.D. all over the world. Once S.H.I.E.L.D. encounters some kind of crisis, it will be activated directly, and the relevant data and information have been deleted by Nick Fury personally. Every secret base can be activated with full power energy for several years. It can resist nuclear explosions and the impact of various natural disasters. The materials stored in it can survive for more than 10 years. Of course, this kind of compressed biscuits is really vomiting. The team headed by Ant-Man is stationed here. It's a pity that Goliath is dead. Our bigger and smaller Pym particles can't solve the number 1 mutant at all. Maybe we should change our mindset. Scott, didn't you say that you entered the quantum universe when infinitely smaller? Maybe we should start in this direction. When using Pym particles to become infinitely smaller, people will fall into a quantum realm. This is an undisputed fact. The wife of a generation of Ant-Man, Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, was reduced to subatomic size in order to stop the missile, and disappeared without a trace ever since. Surprisingly, the second-generation Ant-Man Scott Lang, who was about to inherit his own mantle, accidentally fell into the overcaller domain. However, he successfully returned to reality, but since then, he has been in contact with Janet in the quantum realm. This makes the generation of Ant-Man Hank Pym very exciting. Bring it on. This is not only for my wife, but also for defeating the number 1 mutant. Maybe we can actually invent a time shuttle device from the quantum realm, or open the door to a certain parallel world, and let ourselves in another world help figure out a solution. Hear the words. The second generation Ant-Man Scott Lang also laughed. It's really whimsical, but I like it. Perhaps that mutant number 1 would not have thought that someone would travel between the future and the past to solve him. If we really open the door to the parallel universe, maybe we can find Hulk in another world. Compared to other superheroes they knew, Hulk only under gamma-ray radiation has a broader future and a more powerful evolutionary prospect. Only he could defeat the number 1 mutant. Maybe Hulk in the parallel world has evolved something else, or it has shattered the entire world. In addition, hooking up with Hulk is also very simple. Hey, man, you are dead in my world, do you want to see the murderer who killed you? Single quote. As long as he uttered these words, he might be able to bring Hulk over. Scott Lang completely said his whimsy, which directly caused Hank Pym to laugh. Good for you. Well, it's time for us to work, for the wife and for the space-time installation. Hope the quantum field can bring us some surprises. At this moment, the battle on Alcatraz has already come to an end. Worthington Pharmaceuticals' headquarters has been completely compromised. As a veteran biopharmaceutical company, Warren, the son of the president of Worthington, is a mutant, with a group of wings covered with white feathers growing out of his back, just like angels in the Bible. But this can't make the old father happy. The discrimination and contempt for mutants made him determined to develop a drug that can inhibit the mutant X gene. Soon, he got a little boy who could block the ability of other mutants. Any mutant who approaches him will be completely suppressed by his X gene, unable to perform any abilities. And the brain marrow extracted from his body is even more helpful to the abuse and produced a bottle of inhibitor drugs. To this, capital crime is inevitable. His appearance will only cause more trouble. The mutants in the laboratory are safe. Besides, Supreme, we suspected that we found 2 secret S.H.I.E.L.D. facilities in the Western Desert, and we have been assigned to investigate. In deep air, the command room of an aircraft carrier. Emma, the White Queen, reports to the first Su Chen. A S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who came to inform us was caught in Alcatraz Island. Under the spiritual invasion, he naturally wiped out his memory. Soon, 2 of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s nests were discovered. Very good. Su Chen sat on the throne of the command room. Below the steps, there was a map presented by holographic projection. The 2 secret facilities of S.H.I.E.L.D. were marked red so conspicuously. As long as you catch more S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, you can unearth more information. It won't take many days before they can continue to hide. Emma, the White Queen, is very confident about this. Human memory is like a book for her to read. Few people can guard against her psychic powers. With a little bit of the face, it is absolutely possible to quickly and completely execute a large number of fish that have slipped through the net. At this time, a very strange and terrifying event directly stopped Su Chen's footsteps. He had to go back. Yorkton City, a Blick Street, Manhattan. This is a seemingly ordinary and elegant building, with people coming and going around. Everything looks very normal. But what even Shield didn't know was that this building was actually one of the 3 great temples on Earth. Just today, the sky outside the temple building in Yorkton actually spread out a thin trace of cracks. Accompanied by a loud click, the cracks intensified, like glass shards that kept falling off, and a black and terrifying force kept pouring out from the cracked space. In the blink of an eye, these black trickles wrapped up the entire building and turned into a disgusting black fungus blanket. With the continuous pouring of black energy, this very erosive dark energy gradually spread to the surroundings. The building touched was like high-concentration sulfuric acid spilled on a carton, and it collapsed in an instant. Even all the light and the air were completely eroded by this strange black air, turning into a black strange evil air that curled into the air. What the hell is going on? It didn't take long for the mutants to take over the city before they encountered such an incredible problem. And they don't know that the root of everything is actually related to the Supreme that they serve. Just when Su Chen lost control of his emotions and ran away completely that day, the reality was tampered with recklessly by him, and the traces of personnel existence continued to be wiped out and spread all over the world. At that time, although he did not clearly point to the object of obliteration. But in the subconscious, Kamatage, who was once an enemy, was naturally obliterated on a large scale, so that most of his hands were withered, and the existence of the temple mage became very vacant, so as to provoke the past enemy, the Domum believer. Just today, Cassius received instructions from the Dark Dimension, and the demon god Domum could not wait to descend on the earth today. He wants to turn the whole world into a dark cage, and devour all living creatures with great feasting. Destroy the 3 major temples to me. As long as the magic circle that protects the earth is destroyed, our demon lord will be able to personally descend. Cassius, words stopped abruptly. Follow the killing intent. His whole body exuded a frightening dark atmosphere, and he looked at the slender figure gradually coming from the street in the distance. I know you. Cassius smiled, and he said in a persuasive tone, a young lost person, the darkness has boosted your strength, but you don't know how to properly tap that power and join Domum. Embrace it, it will make you recognize yourself and understand how amazing you are. Su Chen just smiled coldly at this. Go away. Otherwise die. Roll. Otherwise die. Hear the words. Cassius just smiled sullenly. I really don't know good or bad. Do you think this place is your sight? Wearing a black robe, he opened his arms, as if embracing the world. He shouted and chanted, and said, open your eyes and look around. Hiss. The shattered space continued to fall off, and the black magical energy continued to pour out, and the trickle-like black magical energy made the surrounding air more corroded, and all the buildings affected by the black air continued to collapse and dissolve. The initiator of everything is this Cassius, who presided over this black magic ritual. As for the poor temple mages, they were dragged into the mirrored space of the same line and were continuously eaten by the Domum believers. What? Accompanied by a scream, a corpse suddenly fell out of the cracks in the shattered space. It was a temple mage wearing a crimson robe. Su Chen has seen it a long time ago, and even played against it. He glanced at the cracks and gaps all around the air holes, and suddenly realized that a mirrored space was built in this real world. A big battle is taking place in it, so that a series of demonic energy is pouring continuously from the shattered mirror space. It seems that you don't intend to take this thing back. Su Chen also understands that this is a question for nothing. So I didn't continue to talk nonsense. There was no answer. The weird and mysterious fluctuations interfere in reality in this way. The calm and composed Su Chen has been able to rewrite reality very well. This time, he directly erased the concept of distance. The distance of hundreds of meters between the 2 people was completely erased by him with a single thought. This is the ability development that Su Chen has recently thought about. Directly obliterate. The probability of tampering with things. Now, he has directly erased the concept of distance, that is, intervening in space with real fluctuations. What? Cassius was surprised. He couldn't even feel a little energy fluctuation, nor did he catch a hint of an opponent's attack. In such an instant, his figure was pulled in front of the opponent. Then, boom, the other's punch hit his face so ruthlessly. The head burst instantly. However, there was not a drop of blood blooming, but a breath of darkness was spilled. Boy, the demonic energy that rose up unexpectedly showed a face of ugly bird, exactly the face of Cassius. He stared angrily and said with a sneer, "When I finish cleaning up the others, I will come to meet in person for a while, you." Whoosh. After speaking, this magical energy just curled up into the air, poured into the air gap, and penetrated into the mirror space inside. Obviously, Cassius's real body was inside to deal with the temple mages. Su Chen didn't bother to wait any longer. If only this pouring dark atmosphere continues to spread, I am afraid that the entire city will no longer need to be inhabited, and it will become a disgusting black purgatory. Really looking for death, Su Chen's black and white eyes immediately began to perceive the space, and gradually saw the mirrored space framed in the real world from the gap split in the air. Next second, under the ripples of the space slowly rippling out, Su Chen's figure just disappeared in place. Mirror space. Do not. This is no longer a traditional mirror space. In the hands of Cassius, the most proud disciple of Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One in the past, combined with the power of Domum Demon God, this created a terrifying dark world. The temple mages who were dragged in entered or exited, but they were trapped in this realm. But the solution to all this is Cassius, the caster who won the ceremony. But obviously these temple mages could not do it at all, otherwise this evil Cthulhu would not separate out a clone and go to the outside world to check the situation. Cassius was surprised at this moment. But after a brief stupor, he suddenly laughed. I didn't expect that this world is still so anxious to die, or maybe you finally wake up. Do you want to consider what I just proposed? Certainly. Now you are still welcome to enter my world. I forgot to tell you. If you want to go out again, don't think about it anymore. In this magically altered mirror space domain, all the pictures around it are like adding a terrifying bloody filter, and you can see it, a hell on earth. The ground is covered with disgusting fungus blankets, and the buildings are beating like an internal organ, not to mention the smell of sulfur in the air. Just fine smelling is enough to make people sick and nauseous. Here is the projection of the world in the dark dimension beyond the earth. Everything is so distorted and dark. Even standing here, Su Chen feels that his emotions are disturbed by some negative emotions. Depravity, darkness, greed, evil. A terrible negative emotion continues to permeate Su Chen's heart. What? The figures in the crimson robes screamed in the distance, and the mana fluctuations in the whole body gradually blackened. When they were not attacked, they were completely eroded by the reflection of the dark dimension, and they directly became the most devout believers of the demon god of Domum. Do not. There are also temple masters who are desperately resisting, using the white magic of Kamataja's line to try to make the holy white light dispel all the darkness. It's just that under such a dimensional reflection, all his efforts were in vain. The white light that bloomed dimmed instantly, and the whole person's body suddenly burned into black flames. Domum doesn't want to see this disgusting white magic. A word fell. Cassius looked at Su Chen not far away so slowly, and as expected, this young man who didn't know the heights of the sky had already begun to be eroded by demonic energy, and his emotions began to darken and degenerate. Come on, embrace all darkness, and let Domum's power lead you forward. As if responding to his words, the surrounding darkness suddenly began to flow into Su Chen's body. But what surprised Cassius was that the speed of the rapid gathering in front of him was very fast, turning into a whirlpool and gathering like crazy. Wrong. He reacted instantly. It was obviously the other party's power that was devouring here. I belong to the darkness. Why did I get lost? Why did I need to guide? Su Chen smiled. At this moment, his smile was more evil and enchanting, and the black air lingering around his body was even more diffuse. The enemy in front of him didn't understand at all what kind of treatment he would receive when his state of mind gradually ran away and became black and out of control. I will give you a beam of light. It was like speaking and speaking, and in an instant, a bright beam of light blasted through this dark dimensional reflection domain and directly enveloped Cassius. That was the white magic that the temple mage used just now, but now it was Su Chen who took it in his hand. After amplifying and amplifying, it fell on his body. What? Suddenly, painful words came from Cassius's mouth. A sudden, magnificent beam of light not only tore through the reflection of the dark dimension, but also completely enveloped the opponent's body. What? Cassiliston cried out in pain. He couldn't think of how the opponent would suddenly come with a hand of white magic. He roared, and a shocking wave of darkness suddenly rose up all over his body, and the evil spirit aura from Domum was so high. Ho! Accompanied by a loud howl, the whole person's aura fluctuations smashed the shrouded beam of light in this way. Boy, I want you to die. This holy white magic is a means to restrain the evil god. But for Cassius, compared to the pain, his innate disgust made him resist. But at this time, his eyes were suddenly startled. The young man not far in front of him is still absorbing the dark energy around him, and the devilish energy lingering all over his body undoubtedly shows that the other party's mood has fallen into the abyss. Impossible. This alone was enough to turn this little demon into a devout believer of Domum. But why is it still as indifferent as it is now? There is something wrong with his body. Even the devout Domum followers around realized that something was wrong. Not good. The entire projection domain of the dark dimension is about to collapse for this reason. Su Chen not far away was like a whale sucking, constantly swallowing the energy fluctuations around him, so that a symphonic whirlpool airflow appeared above his head. The countless torrents of dark aura fluctuations without exception were captured by Su Chen. This is not the first time he has absorbed the breath of the devil. He had met the evil god Heikong before. Now, encountered another demon god Domum from the dark dimension. Their powers are all interfering in the hearts of others, distorting the will of others, so that they can become their own loyal slaves. However, this is undoubtedly the biggest tonic for Su Chen, who is already able to absorb external willpower at the spiritual level. Click. After he swallowed unreasonably, the dark projections that held everything around him began to collapse, and the spatial structure continued to collapse like falling cement. Do not. Cassiliston was furious. As the initiator of the ceremony, he was unable to continue. Boom. Accompanied by another loud crash, the entire dark projection domain collapsed and dissipated under the loss of strength. No one thought that Su Chen would completely collapse a field in this way. Compared with the last time he dealt with the mirror space, he directly smashed the spell maintainer Baron Mordo. This time it was extremely simple and violent. The disgusting smell of sulfur, high-rise buildings throbbing like internal organs, a scene of purgatory on Earth disappeared without a trace. Now, after the field collapsed, they returned to reality. A group of figures fell from the air. It is still the asphalted street outside the temple just now. But compared to Su Chen before entering, he in front of him was indifferent, revealing an aura of evil charm. While still digesting and devouring and gradually transforming the demon energy that distorted his will, Su Chen's mood was inevitably disturbed by some negative emotions. Certainly, this is not a good thing for the enemy at this time. As the saying goes, blackening is 10 times stronger, and whitening is weak by 3 points. With emotions dominated by anger and vaguely out of control, Su Chen's use of reality tampering immediately ushered in an exponential increase in strength. Why haven't you been transformed by the demon god? Cassius is still struggling with this. But the next second, a dangerous warning sign had already sounded in his mind. Not good. The terrifying killing intent pervades from this. Again, without a trace of energy fluctuations, without any clues, the concept of distance between the two was once again erased by Su Chen. It's this trick again. Cassius ushered in a nightmare in a daze, and the distance between the two was within reach. And a fist from the other side just bombed. Boom. With a loud noise enough to pierce the sonic boom, Su Chen's fist fell on the opponent's head so clearly. The entire face was suddenly distorted, deformed, and then burst open with a bang. This time, most of the figure thrown out had blood mist blooming. Leader. The devout Domum believers around suddenly screamed. They were furious, but I didn't feel uneasy. It's like fear, the emotion of fear has long been lost. Despise Domum's power and go to death. A crowd of figures rushed in and roared loudly. But at this time, Su Chen took advantage of the fact that the negative emotions had not yet dissipated, and once again used the mysterious power that interfered with the reality under his anger. At this moment, in a small area around, the movement of countless molecules suddenly fell into lag. Su Chen was inspired by the bullet time effect produced when Quicksilver was running at high speed, and even the Omega-class stop effect of David the Infinite ability. The space condenses, and reality seems to be frozen, because the hands of time flow no longer move. Stop. Time completely stopped at this moment. Because Su Chen has already used the wave that interferes with reality at this time, erasing the concept of time. No one knows exactly what happened. Despair. When the hands of time resume beating again. Boom. 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 The 7 Domum believers trapped in the realm completely shattered and the blood mist bloomed at the moment when time recovered. Good. Su Chen is very satisfied with his masterpiece. Reality tampering is undoubtedly a very worthy ability to develop. He erased the distance before, which is undoubtedly a concept of space. Now he directly obliterated the concept of time, made him immobile during the lost time of the opponent, made him lose all defensive measures, and then killed him. This is really hard to guard against. I admire you. And this time, a creepy voice came from not far away. I saw Cassius, who had been shattered by most of his body just now, had actually ushered in extraordinary healing, and his injuries were constantly being completely repaired by a dark force. But his voice has completely changed. An incomparably wicked strand of demon gods will came to Cassius, mind like this. The master of the dark dimension, Domum's wisp of will has spied on Su Chen. Domum's wisp of the evil spirits will came in this way. He has completely dominated Cassius' body, and it seems that he doesn't adapt to the human body. He also shook his neck, and the sound of bones like fried beans continued to resound. And this time, a group of Domum believers who had been inspired by the demon gods will came from the temple immediately. They didn't even bother to look at Su Chen, and bowed down and worshipped, in order to show their respect for the evil god. Congratulations on the arrival of the great evil god Domum. Your will lead us forward. The Domum believers shouted loudly. His face without dissatisfaction reveals an expression of admiration and worship. The destruction of the temple in Yorkton allowed Domum to successfully descend from outside the dark dimension. Compared with the followers of Domum, the faintly surviving temple mage's complexion changed drastically. At this moment, they only felt terrified. If the 3 major temples are completely finished, the magic circle that maintains an earth will be completely shattered. At that time, it is not a ray of Domum's will that has come, but the other party's true body completely kisses the earth. Your body is better. This strand of Domum's will does not conceal his desire to covet Su Chen. Compared to Kamataja's temple mages, the young man in front of him made him ecstatic and at the same time extremely annoyed. Dare to swallow my power, you are not the first, the shameless guy at Ancient One is your predecessor. Domum smiled intentionally. Certainly. What made him annoyed was that the young man's energy that swallowed him could be directly transformed, so that he could not feel any resonance at all, but was completely absorbed by the other party. Beast. Domum was a little annoyed, which was completely different from the situation of Ancient One. He can transform and absorb. The thought of the other party devouring dark power and feeding back his own body made him even more annoyed. Don't want to slander our sorcerer supreme. Domum, Ancient One needs your power. Domum's words also made the temple mage frustrated. That is simply slander. It is an intolerable joke. Stupid kid. In response, Domum's contemptuous eyes glanced at them. He didn't even bother to say anything to them. The thin arm under his sleeves gushed out a stream of black air current, which suddenly filled and enlarged, turning into a heart-eater monster unique to the dark dimension. Kill them. Stop talking. Domum looked at Su Chen not far away. Dare to swallow my power. Kid, don't miss me anymore, throw into my dark embrace. This moment, the killing intent is pervasive. Sen Lang's breath seemed to freeze the void, and the airflow around him slowly and completely stagnated. Even more exaggerated is that the sky, which was originally blue as a wash, ushered in the darkness of night. Under the aggressive darkness, everything around me gradually fell into the darkness where I could not see my fingers. You leave directly, Su Chen instructed coldly. Behind him, some mutants of the Utopian camp heard the words, and suddenly did not dare to blend in with the situation in front of him, and began to be ordered to gradually leave this area. Boom! In an instant, Domum's figure moved. His figure is like a ghost, dragging out a trail of black afterimages, which swiftly come directly behind Su Chen. Die! A pair of skinny arms are like eagle claws, attacking fiercely, and the haunting annihilation aura in them is enough to make people feel creepy. Click. But this sudden sneak attack was abruptly grasped by Su Chen's right hand on the opponent's skinny wrist. The opponent's ultra-high-speed movement can't hide from his eyes with extraordinary dynamic vision. Hiss. The dark annihilation aura suddenly dissolved the clothing of Su Chen's arm and the energy barrier of his body. Even the skin was slightly wrinkled. But this annihilation momentum can no longer continue to work. What? Domum frowned. Click. At the same time, Su Chen had completely broken his wrist. Domum didn't realize that his wave of annihilation didn't do much to him. But the next moment, his eyes and vision began to blur, and his head became dizzy, and the sky and the earth seemed to be turned upside down. It turned out that his whole figure was dragged by Su Chen's arm, and he suddenly threw it to a place not far ahead. Boom! After smashing many buildings in succession, Domum's body was lying on top of a ruin. Human body. What makes Domum rage this wisp of will is that no matter how his dark aura changes, this is a mortal human body after all. The foundation of the body is too weak. So at this moment, his whole body's bones were cracked, and the trickle of darkness continued to fill his body, and he began to recover from injuries everywhere. Diaresis, little beast, I will kill you. When I occupy the earth, I will kill your whole family one by one, and then whip the corpse. Domum gritted his teeth. After all, how could he have been so humiliated, how could he be so aggrieved if he was not limited by a human physique? But this series of words was completely heard by Su Chen from a distance. In fact, after completely swallowing the dark aura that twisted the mind, there was not much negative emotion in Su Chen's mind, and the evil charm gradually dissipated. But when he heard the other party's words at this time, Su Chen's face turned black. Qian should never make fun of his family. I have to say that when Iron Man Tony met with Su Chen for the first time, he did summarize the most important point. That is, when facing Su Chen, you must not provoke him. Especially in the 13-year-old teenager who is in the rebellious period, once angering the opponent, it will cause the emotional instability of the opponent so as to attract more powerful forces. Domum, who did not live or die, felt that the concept of spatial distance was completely erased at this moment. Too good for Zhao. A figure appeared in front of him in such an instant. Angrily, Su Chen, whose black hair was hanging slightly, kicked the opponent's half-standing body completely back to the ground so fiercely. Then, he leaned down and hit the opponent's body with punch after punch. Boom, boom, boom. Many shocking fluctuations of power were poured on Domum's parasitic body in this way. Every punch dropped as a violent earthquake that affects the whole city. Every punch drop made the ground seem to be repeatedly hit by meteorites from outside the sky. 7 punches in succession. A bottomless pit appeared on the earth. The surging power of the terrifying force caused the surrounding buildings to collapse completely. As for the parasitic figure of Domum, he couldn't even say a word. There was no whole body, and he died tragically under multiple rounds of horrible force bombardment. Lucky. Boom. The smoke and dust in the sky so slowly rushed straight into the sky like a wolf's smoke. Su Chen under rage went on a brutal bombardment with several punches. Cassius, who was held down in the ruins, was dead, and the waves of power alone overturned the surrounding buildings. A bottomless pit appeared in the city. The spider web-like cracks spread all the way, extending to the end of the field of vision. Domum's wisp of will to descend in this world along with Cassius's body. Oh my god, this. I've seen the supreme style of sorcerer, supreme ancient one, and these temple mages are still in place. They are completely dumbfounded. The physical destructive power of brutal violence is still more eye-catching than the brilliant magic light. The scene just now was too visually impactful. I can't imagine that this is a power that a human should have. Everyone go together and kill him. Domum's wisp of will was thus extinguished and dissipated. Those Domum believers wearing black robes were suddenly out of anger. The Lord humiliated the minister to death. They don't care whether their strengths are compared, they are incredibly low. The devout Cthulhu followers are just like martyrs, and come forward and kill them one after another. Whoosh! A faint rippling wave just rippled behind Su Chen. Puff! Before I could get out of the ripples in the space, a figure wearing a black robe was completely penetrated by a sharp blade shaped by energy fluctuations. Noisy. There was no mood swing in Su Chen's indifferent eyes. Under this extreme indifference, a surge of thought momentum suddenly formed a sharp blade. Puff! It was like a burst of swords flying out, completely cutting off the slaughtered figures from all around. Under the wanton blooming of blood, the Domum believers who have not wavered are still unconscious, and they continue to pounce. At this moment, even the surviving temple mages felt a trace of fear. These guys who have been distorted will make people feel really scared. Endless. Despair. A snapped finger snapped. Like a key to opening, Su Chen has habitually used his fingers to stimulate the interfering force that obliterates life. Of course, this is also because the scope of tampering with reality is too broad, so he needs a instruction of detailed power to stimulate the launch of specific abilities. Obliterate life. Obliterate the traces of life. For Su Chen, whose emotions have calmed down, this is also an increasingly convenient thing. What? Under a scream, their bodies were broken into the simplest molecules in an instant. The running figures turned into a handful of smoke and dissipated into the air. The faces of the temple mages changed. No one thought that the other party would kill dozens of Domum believers in this understatement. He has a relaxed manner and a strange ability, but he wiped out all enemies in an instant. The strength of this guy is too terrifying. Right, and you guys. Su Chen's eyes fell on these figures in crimson robes. In the aftermath of the power just now, only this seemingly ordinary temple of the mage was only destroyed. Even the aura from the dark dimension just eroded, and it couldn't hurt this building too much. Obviously, there are indeed some doorways in it. What? Many temple mages clasped their heads in pain. This moment, they encountered a spiritual invasion from Su Chen. He needs to learn more about magic and dimensional demons, and the easiest and most convenient way is to read their memories. The temple mages did not expect to be happy for a long time before they ushered in an attack from this terrifying existence. So it is. A cascade of information vaguely appeared in Su Chen's eyes, and everyone's memory was quickly read by him like a book. The infinitely evolved mutant gene not only gave him extraordinary superpowers, but also allowed his brain to be developed. Memorability is the most basic. The improvement in IQ also allows him to master more knowledge well. At least the esoteric information left by Mr. Fantastic Reed has already begun to be understood by him. Soon, he knew the importance of this building. The three major temples of Kamatage have formed a magic circle around the Earth's equator to protect the Earth. Domum wants to destroy the temple. The mage sticks to it. After that was a series of chaos. Very good. After Su Chen's indifferent and relentless words, the intrusive psychic fluctuations instantly turned into a terrifying psychic storm, raging in their minds. In just a moment, they did not become idiots or completely brain dead, who seemed to have no casualties. Stop. At this moment, a roaring word came from the temple. I saw Su Chen's old enemy, Baron Mordo, who also wore a crimson robe, walked out. The meeting between the two can be traced back to when Su Chen rushed to the secret base of Stryker. At that time, if it weren't for a puppet doll-like monster item to become a substitute for death, I am afraid Mordor himself would have been killed. A wimpy who flees with his tail dared to stand up. Su Chen said coldly. The expression of Baron Mordo showed anger. He already remembered the last humiliation. But the reason why he dared to show up was because of his safety. Despair. Along with the sound of footsteps, a lady in a white robe just walked out of the temple. Ancient One Mage, Sorcerer Supreme is here. Astonishment sounded all around. The bald face in front of him, with a benevolent and peaceful face, reveals a calm and elegant temperament, which is exactly the Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One. She gently raised her hand, and the surging magical power fluctuations acted on many brain-dead temple mages. It's like the hands of time are reversing. In a blink, the figure slumped to the ground was completely restored to its original intact appearance by Ancient One with one-handed time magic. Bring back to life. The recovered temple mages were also surprised. Ancient One. Su Chen's eyes looked at the bald lady like this. He had already heard her name. I know your Kamatage philosophy, let it go with the flow, let everything in the world develop naturally, or even let it perish, because this is a natural choice. So that's why you, the guardian of the earth, don't interfere in the human world war. But just now you went against nature and resurrected the dead under the sect. Isn't it against your philosophy? Su Chen naturally understood a lot of Kamatage's ideas from the memory search. Hear the words. Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One just smiled peacefully and shook his head, and said, unfortunately, this does not go against, because you shouldn't be here. I will even make up for everything that you have interfered with in reality. Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One spent some time in the dimensional space outside the Earth. After returning, it was discovered that the reality of the world had been drastically tampered with by a force, just like the timeline of the Earth was completely covered by the timeline of another parallel world, so that a lot of errors occurred. The traces of a large number of people's existence were thus obliterated, and the impressions, memories, and related texts that existed all disappeared without exception. This classic of the world was torn a lot of pages continuously by a little boy in the rebellious period. The whole reality was turned upside down. According to Kama-Taja's philosophy and conforming to nature, Ancient One will naturally ignore the wars in the world. That is the evil thoughts of mankind at work. Even if she can prevent the outbreak of war, it will not be able to wipe out the evil thoughts in human hearts. Sooner or later, the war will break out in the next round. All of these are human choices. Blame yourself. Ancient One, as the patron saint of the earth, won't make a move. But the little boy who arbitrarily tampered with reality, caused chaos in the timeline, and turned the whole world into a mess, but she wanted to make a move. I want to rectify all this broken world, set the timeline back to the right, and put all order back on track. I know you and Kama-Taj have also forged some hatred. Trust me, this is definitely not a personal grudge. Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One, dressed in a white robe, said very gently and elegantly. She seems to have a calming temperament, and even her words make people feel like spring breeze. The Baron Mordor who followed was all smiles, and his eyes were staring at Su Chen in such a state of enthusiasm. Su Chen didn't care about the jumping clown at all, but looked at Ancient One coldly and said, "So you want to recover all the enemies that I perished? Annihilated in that catastrophe wave, the person who wiped out all traces of existence can be his enemy. Wolverine, Phantom Cat, General Stryker. Even the existence of the enemy identified in the subconscious. Not to mention there are superheroes killed by him himself. If everything recovers, then all his previous revenge actions must be reduced to a joke. All efforts have been wasted." Yes, Ancient One's answer is very positive. She looked at Su Chen and sighed with relief. Let go of the hatred in your heart first. The destruction you have caused to reality is really terrible, and the chaos in the timeline must be repaired. After the falsification of reality is completely restored, you can no longer use that ability. It will cause too many practical problems. As for your enemy, you can solve it later, and I won't bother about it anymore. A word fell. Su Chen sneered. This is another high-sounding remark. It is also a moral accusation. I have to let all my previous efforts have been completely in vain. Stop dreaming. I don't agree to your terms. It seems that the ending is either you die or I live. Su Chen made no secret of his fighting spirit. The energy fluctuations lingering all over his body just came out, and the aura in his body rose slightly. For a time, the killing intent around him began to spread. The coldness of the coldness makes people feel immersed in the underground ice cellar. Very well, the other party is still resisting. Last time, the evil spirit's body was unclear, and now I am still clueless. Young man, it seems that you still have to go all the way to the dark. Baron Mordor rebuked him quite righteously. He almost burst into laughter from the bottom of his heart. In my mind, I even anticipated the scene of the opponent being completely defeated by the Ancient One mage. Which pot does not open and pick which pot? Mentioned the matter of the evil spirit body before, Su Chen thought of the other party's indiscriminate sniping on himself. New hatred and old hatred. It is good. All the messy accounts are completely settled today. Then let you return to hell together. The energy fluctuations in Su Chen's body became more and more surging. Feeling the murderous sorcerer Supreme Ancient One's calm expression, with a light swing of his right hand, the activation ceremony of the mirror space was completed. The surrounding reality is completely replaced in an instant. Although the environment is still the ruins of the previous city, in specific terms, this is a spatial domain structured in the real world. None of the fighting happening here will affect reality. And just like Cassius, if you don't get rid of the caster, you won't even be able to escape from this world prison. The mages of Kama-Taj rely on this magnificent method so as not to be known to the outside world. Click. The surrounding buildings suddenly made a sound of spinning gears. Soon, in this world, the city area at the far end of the horizon was slowly lifted up like a piece of paper. In just a few seconds, the pouring of dozens of degrees was directed towards the sky. The temple mage can be said to play a very fancy space structure, especially after they have just settled the crisis of the other two temples with Sorcerer Supreme, their killing intent has not disappeared, and they continue to kill in such awe-inspiring manner. Boom! The ground area under Su Chen's feet bounced out like a square. Humph! Su Chen, who had a hunch for a long time, just jumped up like this, surpassing the 9 heavens due to the fluctuations in the power of thought. At this time, the 90-degree tilt of the urban area is so slowly closed, as if the two halves of a book are completely closed, and the building rooftops of the two cities collide in one place. The air area has been successfully sealed off. Many temple mages in crimson robes shouted. After the city is completely folded like a book, the air area available for activities becomes narrower and narrower. Not only that, if the dividing line in the middle is crossed, the gravity on both sides will suddenly reverse. Whoosh! Just now, Su Chen felt a downward gravitational force. After flying past a certain dividing line, he suddenly felt the gravity position change, and the whole person suddenly felt an attraction in the air. In such a folding city, the top of your head is the ground of the other half of the city area, so you should always pay attention to changes in gravity. But Su Chen doesn't care much at all. After adapting in less than half a second, he immediately soared freely in the canine-toothed air area through the fluctuation of his thought power. And the entire mirror space will not be detrimental to you. Because, in such an extremely unstable space field, Su Chen, who is able to display the ability to change the space system, is also greatly strengthened. For example, with one thought from him, the figure of a large number of red-robed mages was so easily erased by him without a trace of signs, and they appeared directly around his body. Very good. This is too easy. The spatial distance around was thus easily wiped out by Su Chen, and 4 figures were dragged by him to his side. There is no trace to follow. There is also no energy fluctuation that can be felt. After the concept of distance was erased, many temple mages looked dumbfounded. Not good. They already felt a powerful killing intent approaching. At this moment, the energy fluctuations pervading Su Chen's waist began to shape, turning into a series of energy tentacles suddenly hanging upside down in the air, and then piercing the surrounding figures like this. Puff! Puff! The sound of multiple blood bursting sounded at once, and the poor temple mage had no room to react, and was completely penetrated by this terrible penetrating force. One after another, the dead figures just fell from the sky. Take your life. The roaring words came from the back like this, and it was still a temple mage who knew nothing about life and death, and then went through the space and killed him from behind. In order to be concealed, he even put on a layer of invisible magic waves when he shuttled through the space. In the blink of an eye, a sharp blade in his hand was thoroughly condensed by magical waves, glowing with a cold edge under the sun's rays. Die. Hidden in the invisible, he pierced with confidence full of confidence. Only the sharp blade in his hand faintly tore the light film. The sharp vertebrae are enough to penetrate the most solid armor. However, he was not clear about his sneak attack and was completely captured by Su Chen, who had enough insight into the space trajectory and even had an extremely keen perception. Dare to attack me even with this little means? Su Chen sneered. The energy tentacles hanging upside down on his back were just a swipe, and with a bang, they completely slapped the opponent out. At this time, another figure wearing a crimson robe was killed in front of him. The magic blade he was holding pierced Su Chen's middle door brightly. Court death. Su Chen's face didn't even move at all. Feng Qingyan stretched out his hand calmly, just grasping the magical blade from the opponent's assassination under the surprised gaze of the opponent. He is not clear about the fluctuation of the magic power of the enchantment. What he knew was that under the control of his great strength, this magical blade that could easily penetrate the armor burst into pieces. The red robe mage was completely dumbfounded. What is the structure of this guy's palm? It actually crushed a sharp blade like this. Not good. A frightening scene followed. Su Chen picked up the fragments of the sharp blade that shattered in the air, and before the magic power dissipated, he slammed into the opponent's heart so fiercely. He squirted blood. The whole person's eyes were filled with despair. At this moment, he had already felt the terrible place of Su Chen. Baron Mordor, who had seen everything in the distance, gritted his teeth. After such a period of time, the young boy grew up at a speed far beyond his imagination. He is strong again. But what about it? Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One is about to subdue him. Suddenly, the sound of the chain movement just came through, and a full 8 chains with magical fluctuations stretched out from the void, and they were so tightly bound to Su Chen's limbs. It's time to stop. Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One shot this. The fierce and decisive boy made her frown, and she didn't know how many fights the opponent had to go through at such a young age to temper such a skillful fighting instinct. Your killing intention is too heavy. Killing so many Taj mages in front of him naturally made Ancient One a little dissatisfied. Just this broken chain dared to trap me. Su Chen sneered. He could feel the suction rushing from the void chain bound to the limbs, arms, and the strength, and even the energy in the body began to dissipate. But when Su Chen's mind didn't even feel tired, and his limbs didn't become as heavy as a shot put, the magic resistance instantly rose rapidly under the stimulation. There was a loud bang. Su Chen was shocked, and the power emerging from his body completely broke the binding rope. Ancient One frowned. The opponent's resistance to magic was beyond her expectations. But at this time, her inherent magical intuition reminded herself that an unknown force was acting on her body. Here we go again. Sorcerer Supreme suddenly understood that the other party had to erase the concept of distance between each other. Her benevolent and peaceful face still showed no hint of panic. The distance of hundreds of meters was erased in this way, which can easily be done by Su Chen, who is calm and composed, in areas where the spatial structure is extremely weak. In other words, this is basically his home court advantage. Looking at this woman who was going to waste all her efforts, Su Chen was angry and couldn't tolerate it, clenching his right fist, and just bombarded away. Boom! The sound of the sonic boom sounded. Under this fragile spatial structure, the aftermath of the force raised by Su Chen's fist even faintly shattered the surrounding space, creating a lot of cracks. But just as this punch was extremely close to the opponent's face, the eyes of the Agamotto worn on the neck of Ancient One exudes a bright green light. The green oval gemstone set in a magic pendant just releases its power. The fluctuations that belong to time come into play here. Su Chen's fist from the bombardment just kept going backwards like this. As if going back in time, his subtle attack was completely cracked by the power of Ancient One Mage's time. And the figure dragged from the tampered reality of Ancient One just returned to its original place. The distance between the two was also extended. Su Chen, who had come back, suddenly realized what had happened. Time resistance plus 200. The constructed system reflects the information of gene transformation well. Compared with David's ability to stop. The green gem worn by this woman is obviously more exquisite than the power of time. Everything is over. Although Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One was horrified at the other party's tampering with reality and obliterating the weirdness of distance, she no longer retains this moment and completely used the Eye of Agamotto, which is the power of the Gem of Time. A force of time rippled out like this, just as a pendulum began to continuously rotate counterclockwise, and a force of time regressing was acting on Su Chen in this way. Ancient One can easily adjust the time to make an intact apple instantly become shriveled. Now, she directly uses the power of time to bring Su Chen back to half a year ago, or a year ago, in order to weaken the opponent's strength. The gem of time that manipulates all the concepts of time in the world releases its dazzling power in this way. Not all infinite gems holders are able to perform its functions, but when Ancient One inherited from the previous Sorcerer Supreme, it has been held for at least 700 years. So at this moment, she is still very familiar with controlling the time gem. Despair. As if the hour hand of a clock was beating in the dark, it was an invisible concept of time, so Ancient One personally transferred the time belonging to Su Chen. She wants to go back to the other person's time and completely return her age to the most young and helpless time. At this moment, Su Chen didn't care, his figure flew directly like a cannonball. What? Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One frowned, her complexion getting more solemn. When she succeeded in setting back the other party's time to a few days ago, she found that the more she had to go back, the more resistance she could feel. It's as if a clock is completely rusty and refuses to allow anyone to stop it. Something is wrong. This is hard work. But Ancient One personally used this trick to subdue how many pujas, and in less than a few seconds, he could call back the opponent's age and strength to a few years ago. In this way, the opponent's strength can be completely disintegrated. But now, this is the first time she has encountered an existence that resists the penetration of time. Not good. She can't continue to allocate the time, because the other side's figure has been completely killed. Under fast casting, multiple magic barriers are completed instantly like breathing. Boom. And at this moment, the figure that Su Chen struck was completely within reach, and his fist was wrapped in a huge and unmatched power and blasted on the figure in front of him. This is not just a pure physical punch. The energy fluctuations from the limbs in the body gathered on the fist, so that the surface of the fist was bursting with incomparable energy fluctuations. Boom. When this punch fell, multiple magic barriers were as crisp as thin paper. The figure of Ancient One was hit frontally. Boom. With a dull loud noise, her thin figure flew to the ground like a shooting star. Boom. The impact power contained was so vast that the flying silhouette of Ancient One smashed more than a dozen buildings on the ground one after another. Sorcerer Supreme. Oh my god. This won't be true. The scene before him was so shocking that all the temple mages present were dumbfounded. The guardian of the earth, Ancient One, was knocked out like a sandbag. In the past, the figure that was so great was just hit by people like a puppet. Everyone only felt shocked and surprised. This is too exaggerated. Is this the so-called Sorcerer Supreme? Too weak. The slender figure above the sky is like a victor, looking down all this condescendingly. A pair of extremely cold eyes just looked at the mages with such unparalleled contempt. Facing each other's ridicule, everyone couldn't even give birth to a trace of thought to refute. Whoosh. At this moment, everyone's vision only felt inexplicable, and the other person's figure was lost in their vision. Boom. But within a second, the ground building in the distance exploded completely, and many buildings continued to explode like firecrackers. The temple mage looked silly. After all, everyone could vaguely see the figure of Sorcerer Supreme being kicked out of the sky. Soon, the splendor of magic and shocking energy fluctuations continued to explode in multiple areas. Building after building is like a toy made of building blocks, constantly collapsing. In the fast and dazzling battle, everyone can't even see the opponent's location, so that there is no way to start. But Sorcerer Supreme seems to be dying. Click. The temple mages wearing crimson robes were cold and sweaty, because the surrounding mirror space had already begun to collapse. The space is constantly disintegrating like patches, and the entire mirror space is crumbling. I am afraid that it will not last long. Obviously, the Sorcerer Supreme, who maintained the ritual, suffered so much that it was unable to maintain this domain at all. Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One was also pale at this moment. Under multiple rounds of attack, she felt the opposing party's powerful sense of oppression more and more. In addition, the power of the time gem could hardly continue to act on the opposing party's body. She struggled, and in the end she could only transfer the opponent's strength back to 3 days ago. But this will not help. It is impossible to weaken the opponent's strength at all. At first, she thought she had a problem with the eyes of Agamotto. But, after 3 consecutive time reversals acted on his body and completely recovered from his injury, Ancient One understood that the opponent's body actually had a sense of repulsion against the power of time. She felt more and more mentally exhausted. Ancient One is no longer what he used to be when he was young. She is just a mortal, and she is on the verge of reaching the end of her life. It won't be long before she will even die. And just now, she even reversed the defeat of the other 2 great temples, so that the consumption was a bit intense. The tiredness accumulated by using the time gems for many times is hard to erase. Not good. The opponent does not give the opponent a break to breathe at all. Boom. Su Chen, who was killed suddenly, was hit with a punch again. Before the space transfer, Ancient One was knocked out again and crashed to the ground like a meteorite. Click. At this moment, the mirror space built around it suddenly collapsed, and it was impossible to continue to maintain it. Under the fragmentation of the mirror, a group of people returned to the real world. It is still the ruined city. Because the multiple rounds of battle in the mirror space just now can't interfere with the real world at all. At this moment, Ancient One was lying down on the ground, vomiting blood, and the light released by the eyes of Agamotto on his neck became dimmed. Puff. She vomited another mouthful of blood. Sorcerer Supreme. Under the exclamation of the surroundings, the anxious meaning of a group of wizards appeared. After feeling the real killing intent, Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One was unable to suppress the dark power accumulated in the body at this moment. In an instant, her injury improved in an instant, and the spirit of the whole person even returned to a state of greater prosperity than during the battle at this moment. But this scene scared the temple mages all around. No, it's impossible. Everyone even felt the collapse of their outlook on life and looked at Ancient One with incredible faces. Su Chen's face was also taken aback at this time, and a hint of icy sarcasm suddenly appeared on the ruthless face of his cold eyes. What a guardian of the earth, I didn't expect you to be such a hypocritical person. Tell everyone why there is the power of Domum in the body of a sorcerer supreme. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.